am Ashley Johnson, 34 years old. 3 days ago, I sat in a freezing Anchorage law office and watched my older brother and younger sister inherit $900,000 in liquid cash. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap as the estate attorney reached into a cardboard box and handed me a dusty, cracked leather Bible as my sole inheritance from our father. My brother actually laughed. The sound echoed off the expensive wood paneling, sharp and grating. He slapped the table, leaned over, and told me I always was the sentimental one anyway. My sister did not even bother to look up from her phone. She was too busy adjusting the portable ring light clipped to her screen, making sure her lip gloss looked right for her next social media post. She could not spare a single second to acknowledge the humiliation that was supposed to be burning in my chest. I had spent my entire 20s serving as their unpaid financial cleaner. I sat under harsh kitchen lights, balancing our father's ledgers, bailing out my brother's failed business loans, and managing the household bills while they partied across the country. Their reward for a lifetime of taking was nearly $1 million. My reward was a heavy block of old paper. They expected me to cry. They wanted a theatrical meltdown so they could call me hysterical and justify taking the money. Instead, I smiled, said thank you, and carefully placed the book inside my leather briefcase. Because I am a commercial lease and quota auditor, I spend my life untangling complex commercial fishing yields and subsurface mineral rights in the unforgiving Alaskan economy. My brain is wired to find the missing variables that other people overlook. And when I pressed my thumb against the spine of that old Bible, the leather did not compress. I felt a rigid, distinct thickness tucked deep inside page 47. An hour ago, my own lawyer made a phone call that is about to turn my siblings' newfound wealth into a legal nightmare. They will never escape. Before I tell you exactly what my father hid inside page 47, let me know how old you are and what state you are watching from in the comments. And if you believe the quiet ones always keep the best receipts, take a second to like and subscribe to Zara Told Stories for more. Now let me take you back to the beginning of this week, to the moment the illusion started in that law office. The sleet drumming against the glass provided a steady, freezing metronome to the morning proceedings. Across the polished table sat my brother Cameron. He wore a custom-tailored fleece vest over a designer flannel shirt, the unofficial uniform of a man trying desperately to convince investors that his failing wilderness eco-lodge was a rugged success. Next to him, Brittany tapped her manicured nails against her designer handbag. She had spent the last 3 years curating an Alaskan lifestyle influencer brand, selling a pioneer aesthetic that was entirely funded by our father's declining health and bank accounts. Mr. Caldwell, an estate attorney with 30 years of frost in his gray beard, adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. He read the primary clauses with practiced clinical detachment. He cleared his throat, his gaze dropping to the heavy parchment paper. The $900,000 liquid estate, Caldwell read, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave, as currently structured and encumbered, is to be distributed equally between Cameron and Brittany Johnson. Cameron exhaled a long, theatrical breath. He leaned back in his leather chair, running a hand through his hair. Brittany offered a practiced, mournful pout, the kind I knew she was testing for a future sympathy post. They heard the number. They heard their names. They stopped listening to everything else. But my pulse shifted. My auditor instincts flared to life. Caldwell had explicitly avoided meeting my eyes. He had recited the cash distribution using very specific syntax, as currently structured and encumbered. My siblings did not catch the qualifier. They never paid attention to the fine print. They only ever saw the bottom line. Then Caldwell reached into the banker box beside his chair. He pulled out the worn, heavy volume, its edges frayed from decades of handling. He slid it across the long table toward me. It stopped inches from my hands. And to Ashley, Caldwell read softly, "The Johnson Family Bible." That was when Cameron made his joke about me being sentimental. That was when I let my fingers trace the cracked spine. A sharp memory surfaced in my mind. I was 22 years old, sitting at the dining room table long after midnight. The house was quiet. I was staring at a stack of our father's quarterly tax burdens. I spent my youth untangling his messy spreadsheets while Cameron totaled expensive snowmobiles on the tundra. My father trusted my math. He relied on my discretion to keep the family solvent during the lean years when the commercial fishing quotas dipped. He was a shrewd, highly calculating man who never made a move without a contingency plan. He knew exactly who Cameron and Brittany were. He knew they bled him dry. He would never hand them a clean windfall and leave his only competent child with a paperweight. Not unless the paperweight held the real value. "Drinks on me at the Captain Cook Hotel tonight," Cameron announced, pulling his phone from his pocket. He was already planning his victory lap. He wanted to call his contractors to brag about the fresh capital. He was blissfully ignorant that taking unvetted liquid cash from a complex estate meant inheriting every hidden liability tied to those accounts. He was grabbing a poisoned chalice with both hands, thrilled by the shiny metal. "Are we done here?" Brittany asked, slipping her phone back into her bag. "I have a brand sponsorship call in 20 minutes, and the lighting in here is terrible." "We are concluded," Caldwell said quietly, closing the heavy file folder. I looked at my brother's triumphant face. I watched my sister stand up, smoothing her expensive coat, treating me with the exact same dismissive indifference she had shown me since childhood. They felt powerful. They felt like they had finally won the unspoken war for our father's legacy, leaving the quiet, boring sister in the dust. I stood up from the table. I felt the comforting weight of the Bible in my hands. The distinct stiffness near the center of the book pulsed against my palm like a secret heartbeat. "Congratulations," I said, keeping my voice mild and pleasant. "I hope the money brings you exactly what you deserve." I turned and walked out of the law office, stepping into the biting Anchorage cold. The freezing air stung my cheeks, but my mind was a furnace. The games were far from over, and I knew Cameron could not resist pushing his luck. 48 hours later, the crunch of heavy tires on frozen gravel broke the pristine silence of my Thursday morning. I was standing on the wraparound porch of my remote lakeside cabin, a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The air was sharp and thin, carrying the distinct metallic scent of the nearby glacier. I had spent 5 years bringing this property back to life. Every cedar plank, every weather-sealed window, and every reinforced roof shingle was paid for with grueling overtime hours auditing commercial fisheries. It was my sanctuary, carved out of the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness, a place entirely separated from the toxic gravity of my family. A matte black luxury SUV pulled up next to my woodshed. The doors opened and Cameron stepped out, wearing imported leather boots that had clearly never touched actual mud. He adjusted his designer sunglasses, surveying the towering pines with a conqueror's smirk. Brittany followed closely behind him. She held her smartphone at eye level, the camera angled to capture both her flawless makeup and the rustic backdrop of my home. She was already speaking to her followers, her voice projecting that manufactured, breathy enthusiasm she used to sell lifestyle supplements. Cameron did not offer a greeting. He marched up the wooden steps, the boards groaning under his deliberate stomping, and shoved a crisp, folded document against my chest. I took a step back, set my coffee mug on the railing, and caught the paper before it fell. I unfolded the thick stock. It was a formal eviction notice drafted by a strip mall law firm demanding I vacate the premises within 30 days. "Dad left the Surface Management LLC to me," Cameron announced, crossing his arms over his chest. His voice carried a smug, breathless excitement. "The decoy will gave him the corporate shell, and he believed that piece of paper made him a king. I own the dirt you are standing on, Ashley. The lawyers confirmed it yesterday. I have the legal right to clear this lot, and the demolition crew is already booked for the end of the month." I looked from the eviction notice to his face. "You want to bulldoze a restored heritage cabin?" I asked, keeping my tone mild, stripping away any trace of panic. "We are building a luxury eco-lodge," Cameron declared, gesturing expansively toward the pristine shoreline. 60 carbon suites, floor-to-ceiling glass, guided heli-skiing tours. It is going to be the premier wilderness destination in the state. I need this lot cleared so the architects can begin their topography mapping. You have to go." Brittany stepped onto the porch, angling her phone to catch my face. "You guys, it is so exhausting dealing with family members who refuse to elevate their mindset," she cooed to her live audience. "I mean, look at this depressing off-grid setup. Who even lives like this by choice? It is like a museum for underachievers. We are going to transform this depressing patch of woods into a state-of-the-art wellness retreat. It is going to be iconic. Cameron walked past me, kicking at the frost-hardened dirt near the porch pylons. He stopped frowning at a small orange-painted metal stake driven deep into the ground. "What are these ugly metal stakes dotting the property line?" he asked, nudging the marker with his expensive boot. "The surveyors better not charge me extra to rip out whatever garbage you left behind." "Those are geological surveying markers," I replied evenly. "The state requires them for designated zones." Cameron rolled his eyes, entirely uninterested in regulatory compliance. "Just have your junk out of here by the first of the month," he snapped. In the realm of forensic accounting, there is a concept known as implied consideration. It describes a transaction where services or funds are exchanged without a formal contract, operating on the unspoken assumption of future repayment. My family had run that arithmetic on me for over a decade. I gave and they took. I bailed Cameron out of his first 2 failed business ventures when the banks threatened to seize his assets. I covered the exorbitant nursing care bills during our father's final months, while Brittany spent her time securing brand deals in Los Angeles. They absorbed my sacrifices as if they were entitled to my life force, never recording the debt, never intending to pay it back. They expected me to break down. They drove 2 hours out of Anchorage, hoping to watch me cry over the loss of my home. They needed my tears to validate their newfound power. I did not give them a single drop of emotional currency. I folded the eviction notice neatly and slipped it into the pocket of my flannel shirt. "I understand," I said quietly. "I will pack my things." Cameron blinked. His triumphant smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He had braced himself for a screaming match. He had prepared arguments and threats, ready to wield his inheritance like a club. My clinical immediate submission derailed his entire script. "Are you serious?" Brittany asked, lowering her phone slightly, her disappointment evident. "You are just going to leave?" "No arguing. No begging Dad for a second chance from beyond the grave. You are so boring, Ashley." I turned my back on them and walked into the cabin. I grabbed my sturdy canvas duffel bag from the hall closet. I did not pack the vintage rugs, the hand-carved dining chairs, or the expensive cast-iron cookware I had curated over the years. They were just objects. I walked into my home office and loaded the bag with the only things that truly mattered: my encrypted hard drives, my forensic accounting ledgers, my backup servers, and the heavy, cracked leather Bible Caldwell had handed me 2 days prior. Within 15 minutes, I walked back out onto the porch, zipping my jacket. Cameron was still standing near the woodshed, watching me with narrowed, uneasy eyes. He had won the property, but my silence unnerved him. It felt wrong to him. It felt like a trap he could not see. I threw my duffel bag into the back of my reliable 10-year-old truck. "Enjoy the Eco Lodge, Cameron," I called out, my voice carrying cleanly over the biting wind. "Make sure you read the zoning permits carefully." I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving them standing in the freezing cold, holding an empty victory. The red herring was perfectly planted. They believed I was defeated, which meant they would proceed with their reckless spending, blinded by their own unchecked arrogance. The drive back to Anchorage took 2 hours, the towering snow-capped peaks of the Chugach Mountains watching my steady retreat. I navigated the slick, winding highway, my mind shifting gears from passive observer to active investigator. I bypassed my old neighborhood and drove straight to a secure, short-term corporate apartment in downtown Anchorage. I had rented it the moment I left the law office, anticipating Cameron's immediate attempt to starve me out. The apartment was sterile, modern, and high above the city noise, accessible only by a keycard elevator. It was a fortress. I locked the heavy steel door behind me, dropped my duffel bag on the kitchen island, and unzipped the main compartment. I pulled out the family Bible. The room was quiet, filled only by the hum of the forced air heater. I ran my fingers over the embossed gold lettering on the cover, feeling the chill of the leather. I opened the book, flipping past the genealogies and the highlighted verses my grandfather used to read. I stopped at page 47. The pages here were glued together at the edges, creating a hidden, hollowed-out cavity. I took a penknife from my pocket and carefully sliced through the aged adhesive. The seal broke with a dry, papery snap. Inside the cavity lay a thick, folded piece of heavy stock parchment and a sealed envelope bearing a wax stamp. I pulled the documents out and spread them across the granite countertop under the bright pendant lights. The parchment was yellowed with age, bearing the unmistakable blue ink stamp of a State of Alaska notary, public dated 1978. I read the legal header, my breath catching in my throat as the dense, archaic legal jargon resolved into a devastating reality. It was not a sentimental letter. It was a master subsurface mineral deed and a declaration of trust. My father had not left me a book. He had left me an empire and the key to dismantling everything my siblings thought they owned. The emotional abuse was over. The high-stakes legal war had just begun. The faded parchment felt brittle against my fingertips, carrying the distinct dry scent of aged wood pulp and forgotten archives. I stood under the harsh glare of my apartment kitchen pendant lights, tracing the raised seal of a State of Alaska notary stamp, dated 1978. It was a subsurface mineral deed drafted decades before my siblings were even born. Beneath the deed lay a thick watermarked card sealed within a plain ivory envelope. Printed across the center of the card was a single string of alphanumeric characters. Below the sequence, my father had written a brief note in his sharp, slanted handwriting: the Borealis Resource Trust, activation code. My father, Michael Johnson, was a man who planned for winters that lasted 8 months. He never left his survival to chance. He built his legacy navigating the treacherous high-stakes currents of Alaskan commerce, mastering the intricate laws of oil extraction and commercial fisheries. He knew precisely how to structure an asset to withstand a brutal storm, and he knew exactly how to set a trap. I needed someone who operated on that exact same ruthless frequency. I did not need Mr. Caldwell, the polite, public-facing attorney who handled the decoy will reading. I needed Nathaniel Pierce. Pierce occupied a corner office in a towering glass high-rise that overlooked the gray, churning expanse of the Cook Inlet. He was a top-tier corporate estate lawyer who specialized in asset protection, hostile takeovers, and silent successions. He was the kind of man who viewed empathy as a strategic weakness. I arrived at his office unannounced. His receptionist attempted to block my path, citing a fully booked schedule, but I simply laid the watermarked card on her polished desk. I told her to pass it to her boss. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy oak doors to the inner sanctum swung open. Nathaniel Pierce stood in the doorway, his sharp eyes assessing me with sudden, intense focus. He ushered me inside and locked the door behind us. The office was quiet, insulated from the howling coastal winds, smelling faintly of expensive espresso and leather bindings. I spread the old Bible, the 1978 deed, and the activation card across his sprawling glass desk. Pierce leaned over the documents. He did not speak for a long time. I watched his eyes track across the archaic legal phrasing, looking for the same hidden variables my own auditor brain had flagged. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Your father was a terrifying strategist," Pierce murmured, his voice laced with genuine professional reverence. "He played them perfectly." "Explain it to me," I said, taking a seat in the structured leather chair opposite him. "I need the exact architecture of the estate." Pierce tapped the edge of the mineral deed. He knew Cameron and Brittany lacked basic financial literacy. Pierce began walking over to a secure terminal on his credenza. He gave them the $900,000 in liquid cash to distract them. It is bright, shiny bait, but that cash is inextricably linked to a staggering deferred Internal Revenue Service estate tax liability. I felt a cold thrill of realization, the qualifier Caldwell used, as currently structured and encumbered. Exactly, Pierce confirmed, typing the alphanumeric sequence from the card into an encrypted federal database portal. The moment your siblings accepted those funds, they legally accepted the crushing tax burden attached to them. The government will seize that $900,000 before Cameron can clear a single check. They inherited a debt collection notice disguised as a lottery ticket. The computer monitor flared to life, casting a pale blue glow across Pierce's face. He turned the screen toward me. Meanwhile, Pierce continued, his tone turning clinical and precise. Michael quietly transferred the actual family empire into the Borealis Resource Trust. I looked at the digital dashboard. The numbers scrolling across the screen defied comprehension. It was not just a trust. It was a fully operational corporate titan. The ledger displayed lucrative commercial crabbing individual fishing quotas guaranteeing millions of dollars in sustainable, untouchable annual revenue. But the true genius lay in the real estate structuring. Pierce clicked a folder labeled Surface versus Subsurface. He brought up the plat map for my lakeside cabin, the exact property Cameron had gleefully evicted me from just hours prior. Cameron holds the surface management corporate shell, Pierce explained, tracing a finger over the digital boundary lines. He owns the dirt on top. But the Borealis Trust owns the grandfathered oil leases and mineral rights beneath that dirt. In Alaskan real estate law, subsurface rights hold supreme authority over surface rights. I stared at the map, piecing the puzzle together. The strange geological surveying markers Cameron had kicked on the porch steps. They were not my junk. They were boundary stakes for the subsurface claims. Cameron cannot pour a concrete foundation, lay a sanitation pipe, or bulldoze a single tree without your explicit written authorization, Pierce stated, delivering the killing blow to my brother's arrogant dream. His luxury wilderness resort is legally impossible to build. You control the ground beneath his feet. The air in the office felt electric. I was the sole beneficiary and the chief executive officer of the Borealis Resource Trust. The balance of power had shifted so entirely that the room seemed to tilt. But Pierce was not finished. He opened a final encrypted tab on the dashboard. The Borealis Trust does not just hold assets, he said, meeting my gaze, with a look of chilling finality. It operates as a private lending institution. Over the last decade, whenever Cameron or Brittany secured loans for their failing ventures, those debts were quietly purchased and consolidated by a parent company. I looked at the names listed on the secured creditor registry. Cameron's ecotourism development firm, Brittany's influencer lifestyle holding company. The bank does not own their debt, Pierce whispered. You do. The weight of the revelation settled into my bones. My siblings had spent their entire lives treating me like a disposable servant, a naive outcast who could be bullied and discarded at will. They had marched onto my property, mocked my existence, and thrown me out into the cold, believing they were untouchable pioneers. They had no idea they were financially bleeding to death. The inheritance they celebrated was an anchor dragging them to the bottom of the ocean, and I held the only key to their chains. I did not feel a sudden rush of vindictive joy. Instead, I felt the clinical, unyielding focus of a lead auditor preparing a final report. My father had handed me a loaded weapon, and I was going to ensure my targets were standing exactly where I wanted them before I pulled the trigger. "What are your orders?" Pierce asked, his hands hovering over his keyboard, ready to execute my command. "Initiate the succession protocols," I instructed, my voice steady and devoid of any hesitation. "Do it silently. Do not notify their legal counsel. Do not file any public notices until the mandatory federal deadlines require it." Pierce nodded, his fingers flying across the keys, setting the administrative gears in motion. I stood up, gathering the ancient Bible and placing it back into my briefcase. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted Cameron to hire his contractors, order his luxury materials, and commit every stolen dime to his fictional eco-lodge. I wanted Brittany to leverage her fake wealth to secure even more debt. "Let them spend the decoy money," I told Pierce, walking toward the heavy oak doors. "Let them dig their own graves. We will arm the invisible financial minefield and wait for them to step on the first wire." I stepped out of the law office and back into the biting Anchorage afternoon. The sky above the Cook Inlet was bruising into a deep, stormy purple. The permafrost would be freezing soon, bringing construction across the state to a grinding halt. Cameron was running out of time. He would need immediate, accessible capital to break ground, and when he realized his inheritance was caught in a bureaucratic snare, his desperation would peak. He would need someone to blame. He would need a target. I knew my brother better than anyone, and I knew his next move would be an attempt to destroy my livelihood. I welcomed the upcoming attack. It would give me the perfect excuse to drop the first guillotine on his neck. The Alaskan winter does not arrive gently. It encroaches like a closing steel vault door. By late October, the topsoil across the state begins to harden into permafrost, effectively halting any new foundation work until the spring thaw. Cameron had less than 3 weeks to break ground on his lakeside luxury eco-lodge, to mobilize excavation crews, secure heavy earth-moving machinery, and pour the foundational concrete. He required immediate, highly liquid capital. He had banked his entire development timeline on the $900,000 inheritance clearing his accounts by Friday. But the Internal Revenue Service does not care about wilderness construction schedules. When Cameron attempted to withdraw the initial mobilization funds, he slammed face first into a federal administrative hold. The decoy cash was tangled in a complex probate tax audit frozen solid by the very liabilities my father had intentionally attached to it. Cameron was staring down an army of waiting contractors holding expensive equipment demanding unrefundable deposits he no longer possessed. He was cornered. And a cornered man always looks for a scapegoat to bleed. My morning started in the sterile quiet of my downtown corporate apartment. I sat at the glass dining table analyzing the latest commercial crabbing yields for my biggest consulting client, Northern Apex Fisheries. I had spent 6 years building a flawless reputation in the Alaskan maritime sector. Quota auditing is a tight-knit, unforgiving industry where trust is your only real currency. You either report the numbers with lethal accuracy or you find another line of work. At 9:15, my phone buzzed against the glass tabletop. It was Marcus, the operations director for Northern Apex. He did not offer his usual gruff greeting about the incoming weather systems sweeping across the Bering Sea. His voice was stiff, carrying the distinct measured tone of a corporate risk manager mitigating a sudden disaster. Ashley, Marcus said, the audio crackling slightly over the line. We are going to have to terminate your consulting retainer effective immediately. Our legal department is drafting the cancellation paperwork right now. You will be compensated for the hours billed this month, but your server access is being revoked as we speak. I lowered my pen. My chest tightened, a cold knot forming beneath my ribs. Companies do not terminate a 6-year relationship on a Tuesday morning without a catastrophic catalyst. I need an explanation, Marcus, I replied, keeping my voice steady. If there is a discrepancy in my reporting, I need the opportunity to address it before you execute a termination. A heavy silence hung on the line. Then Marcus let out a slow breath that sounded uncomfortably close to pity. Your brother called our board of directors an hour ago, Marcus admitted, his tone defensive and clipped. He felt it was his fiduciary and moral duty to warn us about your current status. Cameron told the board you were formally disinherited. He claimed the family caught you attempting to systematically steal from your father during his final days in hospice. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. Cameron stated they were keeping the matter out of criminal court to protect your father's legacy. Marcus continued, pushing the blade deeper into my professional standing. But he strongly advised us that placing sensitive maritime financial data in your hands would be a severe liability. He used the words unstable and compromised. The board cannot ignore a direct warning from the Johnson family, Ashley. The optics alone are radioactive. My hands are tied. I am sorry. The call disconnected. Before I could even process the depth of the betrayal, the phone rang again. Over the next 2 hours, the professional dominoes fell with brutal efficiency. My second largest client, a boutique marine logistics firm operating out of Dutch Harbor, called to suspend my contract, citing concerning information received from my brother. A third client, a marine biology research startup, emailed a formal termination notice before noon. Cameron was utilizing the vast social leverage my father had built in the Anchorage business community. He was wielding our family name as a club, systematically smashing the independent professional reputation I had painstakingly constructed from the ground up. He was telling the most influential executives in the state that I was a thief and a liar. He wanted to cut off my cash flow to punish me for his own failures. He assumed I was currently scrambling for rent money after the lakeside eviction. By destroying my consulting business, he intended to starve me out, forcing me to come crawling back to him, begging for a menial bookkeeping job in his new company. I stared at the dark screen of my phone. The betrayal burned fiercely in my chest, a hot, tight knot of anger and injustice. For 30 years, my family had treated me as a disposable asset. Now they were actively trying to erase my ability to survive in my own home state. My phone vibrated one last time. A text message from Cameron illuminated the screen. Actions have consequences. Nobody hires a thief in this town. Good luck paying rent, sentimental sister. He was expecting me to call him sobbing. He was waiting for my hysterical apology. He wanted to hear the defeat in my voice. I did not text him back. I did not call to defend myself. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the snow clouds gathering over the mountain peaks. My father had taught me how to read between the lines of a balance sheet, how to spot the fear hiding behind the numbers. I let the initial wave of betrayal wash over me, and then I let my auditor persona take the wheel. Why would Cameron waste time calling my clients if he had a multi-million-dollar eco-lodge to build? Because he was not building anything. He was stalling. He was lashing out because he was highly over-leveraged and drowning in panic. He needed to project dominance to hide his impending bankruptcy from the world. I stood up, walked over to my secure workspace, and booted up my encrypted laptop. I entered the master activation code for the Borealis Resource Trust. The digital dashboard flared to life, casting a cool blue light across my face. I brought up the secured creditor registry, filtering the data to monitor Cameron's corporate banking activity. The screen painted a vivid, undeniable picture of a man in total financial freefall. Cameron was frantically attempting to move money between empty corporate shell accounts, trying to create the illusion of liquidity to stave off his demanding contractors. I watched his transaction logs update in real time. He was trying to wire $50,000 to an excavation company to secure the earth-moving equipment. The transaction request popped up on my screen, blinking in harsh red text, pending authorization from the primary lien holder. He was trying to spend money he did not possess, using property he did not legally control to fund a project that was already dead in the water. He wanted to play games with reputations. He wanted to weaponize the concept of theft and show me what it felt like to lose everything in the blink of an eye. I placed my hand over the computer mouse. I had spent my entire morning absorbing his vicious lies, playing the role of the defeated, helpless victim. My total submission had bred extreme complacency in him. He thought he had delivered a fatal blow. He thought he had won the war before it even started. It was time to introduce him to the new reality. I hovered the cursor over the pending wire transfer. The contractors were sitting in their trucks waiting for that money to mobilize their heavy machinery. If that wire failed, the excavation crew would walk off the lakeside site, and his eco-lodge would be permanently delayed by the freezing permafrost. I clicked the denial protocol. Insufficient authorization. The transaction instantly died. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, watching the dashboard, as a second wire transfer attempt appeared 3 minutes later. He was trying again, likely sweating through his designer vest, pounding his fist on his desk, assuming it was a simple banking glitch. I denied the second attempt. Then, I denied a third. The time for silent observation was officially over. I was going to drop the first invisible financial guillotine directly onto his operations, severing his lifelines one by one until he was forced to look up and realize exactly who was holding the rope. Financial traps do not explode. They suffocate. A well-constructed corporate snare operates with a cold mechanical efficiency that leaves the victim entirely unaware they are bleeding until the room starts to spin. At exactly 8 in the morning on Thursday, the federal government executed a sweeping non-negotiable lien against the liquid estate of Michael Johnson. The $900,000 sitting in the probate escrow accounts, the cash my siblings had already mentally spent on luxury construction materials and influencer marketing campaigns, evaporated into the federal treasury. My father had meticulously structured his final years of business to accumulate a massive deferred tax burden, legally tying the debt directly to that specific cash payout. It was a brilliantly designed poison pill. The moment Cameron and Brittany accepted the inheritance at the law office, they unwittingly accepted the total tax liability. The Internal Revenue Service did not call them to apologize or offer a payment plan. The agents simply drained the accounts to satisfy the outstanding balance. My brother and sister were left with a zero balance, a mountain of unfulfilled contracts, and a rapidly ticking clock. I watched the fallout unfold in real time from the quiet sanctuary of my secure downtown apartment. The Borealis Resource Trust digital dashboard provided a god-level view of their impending ruin. Cameron was standing on the absolute precipice of the Alaskan winter. The topsoil was hardening into solid ice, and his excavation crew had already walked off the lakeside property because I had rejected his initial wire transfers the day prior. Desperate to keep his wilderness resort project breathing, he pivoted to his backup capital. He attempted to run his corporate platinum credit cards to pay his luxury architects and to secure the imported timber required for the lodge framing. Sitting at my glass dining table, I watched a notification ping on my encrypted monitor. The transaction request routed directly through the parent holding company, which I now exclusively controlled. I hovered my cursor over the pending approval button for a fraction of a second, feeling the immense quiet weight of the power my father had handed me. Then I clicked the mouse. Transaction declined. Insufficient authorization. A minute later, Cameron tried a different corporate card. I blocked it. He attempted to access a personal line of credit tied to the family business. I nullified the request. I could vividly picture him standing in the freezing dirt of my former home, his face flushed red with rage, screaming at a customer service representative over his cell phone. He was undoubtedly convinced it was a temporary banking glitch or a minor probate delay. He had absolutely no idea the sister he had just ruthlessly evicted was sitting in a warm, quiet room methodically suffocating his corporate entity with a single keystroke. Brittany was experiencing her own spectacular collision with reality on the other side of Anchorage. While Cameron scrambled in the frozen mud, she was busy trying to leverage her anticipated wealth to elevate her social status. My sister had spent the last 2 months designing a high-end wilderness fashion line, hoping to pivot from a local lifestyle influencer into a national retail brand. To fund the overseas manufacturing and book a lavish launch party, she submitted a massive commercial loan application to a major state bank. She offered her half of the now non-existent inheritance and her luxury vehicles as collateral. Under normal circumstances, the bank would have processed the loan in a matter of days, but the Borealis Trust held a senior secured lien on every single family asset, a legal iron curtain my father had established decades ago. The automated underwriting software at the bank flagged her application immediately and forwarded it to the primary creditor for final approval. The loan file landed directly in my inbox. I opened the document, reviewing her absurdly inflated revenue projections and ridiculous marketing budgets. Brittany genuinely believed she was a brilliant entrepreneur, completely oblivious to the fact that our father had been secretly subsidizing her entire aesthetic for years to keep her quiet. She thought her online followers translated to actual financial acumen. I drafted a formal corporate rejection notice citing the senior lien held by the trust permanently blocking the collateral transfer. I locked her out of the capital markets entirely. Her fashion line was dead before a single stitch of fabric was ever sewn. The tension in the digital ledger spiked violently throughout the afternoon. They were slamming face first into an impenetrable bureaucratic wall they could not see or comprehend. The precision of forensic accounting is lethal, precisely because it leaves no fingerprints. It operates entirely through automated rejections, frozen holds, and compliance flags. My siblings were drowning in a financial vacuum of their own, flailing wildly as the oxygen was sucked from the room. They believed they were fighting faceless banking algorithms, slow-moving probate courts, and incompetent financial advisors. They had no idea they were fighting me. The emotional detachment I felt was profound. I did not feel pity as I watched their accounts flash red. I felt the satisfying click of a balanced ledger. For 30 years, I had been the shock absorber for their reckless behavior. I was the one who smoothed over the unpaid bills, the one who navigated the angry creditors, and the one who sacrificed my own peace of mind to maintain the illusion of their success. The Borealis Trust allowed me to finally remove the safety net. Gravity was doing the rest of the work. By late afternoon, the sheer terror of their insolvency reached a boiling point. The sun dipped below the Chugach Mountains, casting long, dark shadows across my apartment. My phone vibrated against the glass desk, disrupting the quiet hum of the room. A text message from Cameron illuminated the screen. The mocking, triumphant tone he had wielded just yesterday at the cabin was completely eradicated. His message was frantic, typed with poor grammar, and barely contained hysteria. He demanded a family mediation dinner at an expensive seafood restaurant downtown for the following evening. He claimed we needed to sit down immediately to resolve the unexpected estate delays and pool our resources. I stared at the glowing text. It was not a request for a peaceful mediation. It was a summons. Cameron and Brittany had run out of other people money. They were turning their sights back to the quiet, obedient sister they believed was hoarding cash from a successful consulting business. They intended to ambush me, manipulate me with family guilt, and extort a bridge loan to keep their sinking ships afloat. They wanted me to save them one last time. I picked up my phone and typed a single word in response. Yes. I set the device down and reached for my leather briefcase. I had spent my entire life playing the role of the passive victim. Tomorrow night, I was going to walk into that restaurant, open my files, and introduce them to the chief executive officer of the Borealis Resource Trust. The high-end Anchorage seafood restaurant was a masterclass in manufactured rustic elegance. Suspended fishing nets woven with imported fairy lights hung from vaulted cedar ceilings, while massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the frozen harbor. The air smelled of melted butter, seared halibut, and exorbitant prices. I arrived at exactly 7 in the evening, handing my heavy wool coat to the hostess. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer and walked into the dining room. I spotted them immediately. Cameron and Brittany were seated at a circular booth near the back, safely away from the local politicians and oil executives, dining near the fireplace. They were not alone. Sitting next to my brother was a man in a poorly fitted gray suit, aggressively shuffling a stack of papers. I slid into the booth opposite them, placing my leather briefcase on the bench beside me. Cameron offered a tight, forced smile that barely reached his eyes. The effortless arrogance he had projected at my cabin just days prior had evaporated, replaced by a restless, twitchy energy. His designer fleece vest looked slightly wrinkled. Brittany sat perfectly rigid, ignoring her glass of sparkling water. She looked pale. The influencer glow she carefully maintained for her digital audience had faded into genuine, undeniable exhaustion. Ashley Cameron began adopting the hearty, booming voice of a successful patriarch. Thanks for coming. I know things got a bit heated at the lake, but we are all adults here. We need to focus on solutions. This is Mitchell. He is a corporate mediator. I looked at the man in the gray suit. His briefcase bore the faded logo of a strip mall legal clinic. He was a bottom-tier attorney, the kind of lawyer who handled minor contract disputes and noise complaints. My siblings had hired him to intimidate me, operating under the delusion that a cheap suit and a legal title would frighten an auditor who spent her days dissecting federal maritime regulations. Nice to meet you, Ashley Mitchell said, offering a practiced, insincere nod. Your brother called me in to help facilitate a productive dialogue regarding the current estate delays. I did not shake his hand. I simply looked at him until he nervously cleared his throat and looked down at his documents. My family had a long history of outsourcing their dirty work. Whenever they wanted to legitimize their abuse, they recruited an external authority figure. A high school guidance counselor to excuse Cameron failing grades, a private accountant to hide Brittany maxed out credit cards, and now a discount lawyer to frame an extortion attempt as a mediation. I am listening, Cameron, I stated, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any familial warmth. Cameron leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table. We hit a minor administrative snag with the inheritance, he explained, his eyes darting quickly toward the restaurant entrance and back. It is a ridiculous bureaucratic error. The federal revenue agents placed a temporary freeze on the liquid assets due to an outdated tax filing from Dad. It is going to take a few weeks for my legal team to sort it out and release the funds. I stared at him, observing the flawless delivery of his lie. He was an exceptional salesman, capable of spinning a catastrophic IRS seizure into a minor clerical delay. The problem is, the Alaskan winter, Cameron continued, pressing his hands together. The permafrost is setting in. If I do not pour the foundational concrete for the Eco Lodge by next Tuesday, my excavation crew will walk off the site. I lose the entire construction season. And Brittany has overseas manufacturing deadlines for her wilderness apparel line that require immediate deposits. We are facing a severe temporary liquidity crisis. He paused, waiting for me to nod in sympathy. I gave him absolute silence. We know your consulting business is highly lucrative, Cameron said, his tone shifting from explanatory to demanding. You have been hoarding cash from those commercial fisheries for years. You live in a tiny cabin and drive a 10-year-old truck. We know you have substantial reserves. We need a personal bridge loan. $200,000 wired to our joint account by tomorrow morning. The audacity of the request hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They had evicted me from my home, laughed at my expense, and launched a coordinated smear campaign to destroy my professional reputation. Now blinded by their own panic, they expected me to empty my bank accounts to save them from drowning. Brittany leaned across the table, placing a manicured hand over her heart in a gesture of pure theatrical desperation. "Ashley, please," she whispered, her voice trembling with weaponized guilt. "We are family. Dad would want us to stick together during a crisis. He would be devastated to see you hoarding your money while his legacy falls apart. He raised you to support this family. You owe it to his memory to help us." I looked at my sister. The manipulation was so deeply ingrained in her psychology that she genuinely believed her own narrative. She believed my life existed solely to serve as their financial shock absorber. I unlatched my briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a standard wire-bound notebook and a black fountain pen. I opened the notebook to a blank page and uncapped the pen. The scratching sound of the metal nib against the paper was unnaturally loud over the ambient noise of the restaurant. I wrote down the date and the time. "What are you doing?" Cameron asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "I am documenting this meeting," I replied clinically, not looking up from the page. "I wrote down the specific sum you requested, $200,000. I am also noting Brittany attempting to utilize emotional coercion regarding our deceased father." Mitchell, the lawyer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Miss Johnson, this is a private, informal mediation. There is no need for transcriptions." "This is an audit," I corrected him, my eyes snapping up to meet his. "And in an audit, every verbal representation is recorded for future verification." Cameron slammed his hand onto the table, rattling the silverware. The facade of the cooperative brother shattered instantly, revealing the venomous cornered animal underneath. "Stop playing games," Ashley Cameron hissed, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "I am not asking for a favor. I am giving you an opportunity to survive. You think you are so smart because you play with spreadsheets all day. You have no idea how this city operates. If you do not wire that money by tomorrow morning, I will make a few more phone calls. I already cost you your top 2 clients. By Friday, I will ensure every commercial fishery from Anchorage to Dutch Harbor blacklists your name. You will never work in Alaska again. You will be serving coffee to tourists for minimum wage." The threat hung in the air, vicious and unvarnished. It was the exact mistake I had been waiting for him to make. I looked down at my notebook. I carefully transcribed his threat word for word. I wrote the word extortion in bold capital letters and underlined it twice. I capped my pen and placed it next to the notebook. I looked Cameron dead in the eye. "I am not giving you a single dime," I stated cleanly. The table erupted. Brittany let out a shrill, hysterical gasp, burying her face in her hands. Cameron lunged halfway across the table, his physical intimidation tactics taking over as his intellectual leverage failed. "You ungrateful, selfish failure!" He spat, spit flying from his lips. "You are nothing without this family. We own you." Mitchell raised his hands desperately, trying to restore order to a situation he was entirely unequipped to handle. "Please let us calm down and review the promissory note options," he stammered, pulling a blank contract from his folder. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I allowed their masks to slip completely, watching their pure, unadulterated greed spill out into the open. They had revealed exactly who they were, and they had done it in front of a witness. My defensive posture had served its purpose perfectly. They were blind, deaf, and entirely unprepared for what was coming next. I reached back into my leather briefcase. My fingers brushed past the notebook and settled on a thin, unmarked manila folder. I pulled it out and held it over the polished wood of the dining table. The narrative of the quiet, obedient sister ended right here. I slid the unbranded folder across the table. It stopped directly in front of the lawyer. "Read it, Mitchell," I commanded, shifting my posture from passive observer to absolute, undeniable authority. "Read it out loud." Mitchell hesitated. The cheap synthetic fabric of his suit rustled as he reached for the manila envelope. He flipped the cover open. The first page was a comprehensive master ledger. I had printed the corporate accounts for the ecotourism development firm, highlighting the staggering negative balances in stark crimson ink. The subsequent pages detailed the personal credit lines tied to the Wilderness Apparel brand, showcasing the exact ceiling hit just 72 hours ago. Mitchell blinked, his eyes darting across the columns. His brow furrowed. He looked up, confusion fracturing his manufactured confidence. "These are confidential financial records?" He stammered, his voice lacking any real conviction. "You cannot possess these documents without a court order." "I did not need a subpoena, Mitchell," I replied, my tone clinical and steady. "I obtained them legally through the parent holding company." Cameron snatched the folder from the lawyer. His eyes scanned the top page. The vein pulsing near his temple grew pronounced. He stared at the itemized list of his unpaid contractors, the rejected wire transfers, and the zero balance of his operating capital. The arrogant sneer melted off his face, replaced by a hollow, terrified realization. Brittany leaned over his shoulder to look at the paperwork. Her manicured fingers began to tremble. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her expensive contour makeup looking like dirt smeared on pale porcelain. "You hacked my bank accounts," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This is a federal crime. I am calling the police." "You are welcome to dial 911, Brittany," I said, leaning back against the leather booth. "But before you invite law enforcement to review your financial history, you should understand who you are threatening." Mitchell tried to regain control of the narrative, puffing out his chest. "Miss Johnson, possessing stolen financial data is a serious offense. My clients have every right to pursue litigation for this breach of privacy. You are attempting to deflect from the bridge loan we came here to discuss." I unlatched the secondary compartment of my briefcase. I withdrew a thick stack of heavy parchment bound by a brass clasp. The top document bore the faded blue ink stamp of an Alaskan notary public from 1978. I placed the stack deliberately on top of the open ledgers. "I am not deflecting, Mitchell," I stated, locking eyes with the attorney. "I am introducing myself. My name is Ashley Johnson. I am the sole beneficiary and the chief executive officer of the Borealis Resource Trust." The silence that descended over our table was profound. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking silverware and murmuring patrons seemed to fade into a distant hum. Cameron stared at me, his mouth parting slightly. The name of the trust meant nothing to him, but the authority radiating from my posture sent a visible shiver down his spine. Mitchell picked up the heavy parchment. As a legal professional, he possessed the literacy required to understand the devastating architecture of my father's estate trap. His eyes widened as he read the master deed. He flipped to the second page, tracing the paragraphs outlining the commercial crabbing quotas. He turned to the third page, reviewing the secured creditor registry. The lawyer swallowed hard. The Adam's apple in his throat bobbed. He looked at Cameron, then at Brittany, his expression contorting into a mixture of professional horror and personal disgust. "You told me your father left you a clean liquid inheritance," Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You claimed your sister was a disgruntled freelancer withholding family funds. You failed to disclose that your entire corporate structure is subordinate to a senior secured lien. We have the money," Cameron lied, slamming his fist onto the table. "It is just tied up in probate. She is fabricating this trust to steal our land." Mitchell shook his head, dropping the documents back onto the table as if they were covered in venom. "These deeds are authenticated. They bear federal routing numbers. The trust holds the primary debt on every single business loan you currently possess. You are insolvent." The attorney stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. In the legal profession, representing clients who actively misrepresent their solvency during a financial negotiation constitutes a severe ethics violation. Mitchell realized he had been dragged into a fraudulent extortion attempt. "I cannot represent clients who lie to me," Mitchell announced, grabbing his briefcase and shoving his personal notepad inside. "This mediation is terminated. Do not contact my office again. I will be sending an invoice for my hourly rate, and I expect it paid by Friday." Mitchell turned on his heel and marched out of the dining room without looking back. Cameron and Brittany were left sitting across from me, entirely stripped of their hired protection. The illusion of their wealth was shattered, scattered across the mahogany table in stark black and white ink. They were alone with the sister they had spent a lifetime treating like a disposable servant. "What is this?" Cameron demanded, his voice a hoarse, ragged croak. He pointed a shaking finger at the trust documents. What did Dad do? Dad knew you lacked basic financial literacy, I explained, keeping my tone clinical and unyielding. He gave you the $900,000 because that cash was inextricably linked to a staggering deferred tax liability. The Internal Revenue Service seized it this morning. You inherited a debt collection notice disguised as a lottery ticket. Brittany let out a choked sob, pressing her hands against her mouth. The boutique fashion line, the launch parties, the influencer aesthetic. All of it was turning to ash before her eyes. Meanwhile, I continued tapping the 1978 deed. He transferred the actual family empire into the Borealis Trust, the commercial fishing yields, the parent holding company that owns your corporate debts, and the subsurface mineral rights for the lakeside property. I watched the realization hit Cameron. The blood drained from his face. The eviction notice you served me 48 hours ago is null and void, I informed him, delivering the killing blow to his wilderness resort project. You hold the surface management shell. You own the dirt on top. But I own the bedrock beneath it. In Alaskan real estate law, surface rights are legally useless without subsurface approval. You cannot pour a concrete foundation, lay a sanitation pipe, or bulldoze a single tree without my explicit written consent. Your eco-lodge is a ghost. You cannot do this, Cameron whispered, his eyes wide with unvarnished terror. We are your blood. We are your family. You ceased being my family the moment you tried to destroy my commercial consulting business to save your own sinking ship. I replied, gathering my documents and sliding them back into my briefcase. You tried to starve me out. You thought my silence was weakness. You were wrong. My silence was an audit. And you failed. I fastened the brass clasps on my bag and stood up. I looked down at the two strangers sitting in the booth. I am issuing a formal corporate mandate, I stated, ensuring my voice carried the immovable weight of a chief executive officer. You have exactly 7 days to produce unredacted financial ledgers for every single corporate entity you operate. I want to see every receipt, every shadow account, and every offshore wire transfer. What happens if we refuse? Brittany asked, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, ruining her flawless makeup. If you fail to comply by next Thursday, I will initiate foreclosure proceedings. I promised, my gaze shifting between them. I will seize all physical assets to satisfy your outstanding debts to the trust, the luxury vehicles, the penthouses, the snowmobiles, the boats. I will strip you down to the clothes on your backs. I did not wait for their response. I turned and walked toward the restaurant exit, retrieving my heavy wool coat from the hostess. I pushed through the double glass doors and stepped into the freezing Anchorage night. The coastal wind whipped my hair across my face, carrying the sharp, crisp scent of impending snow. I walked to my truck, my boots crunching rhythmically against the icy pavement. The defensive phase of my father's contingency plan was finished. I had neutralized their attack and exposed their insolvency, but I knew the psychology of a cornered predator. Cameron would not surrender his pioneer fantasy, and Brittany would not relinquish her social status. Faced with a mandate they could not fulfill, they would bypass logic and escalate into profound recklessness. They would seek out dangerous capital to patch the gaping holes in their ledgers, searching for a bypass around my blockade. The financial abyss was yawning beneath them, and in their desperation to avoid falling, they were about to commit crimes that would seal their fate forever. The 7-day corporate mandate I issued at the seafood restaurant was designed to act as a psychological pressure cooker. I knew Cameron and Brittany possessed no legitimate financial ledgers to surrender. Their entire enterprise operated on smoke mirrors and our father's stolen capital. By demanding unredacted transparency, I removed their ability to hide in the gray areas of business. They had two choices. They could admit total insolvency and hand over the keys to their fabricated kingdom, or they could cross the line from civil misrepresentation into deliberate, premeditated felony. My brother had never surrendered a day in his life. Growing up, whenever Cameron faced an obstacle he could not charm his way through, he cheated. If a high school term paper was due, he bought one from a desperate classmate. If he failed a driving test, he bribed the instructor with tickets to a hockey game. He treated rules as suggestions meant only for the lower classes. Faced with the impenetrable digital fortress of the Borealis Resource Trust, he reverted to his oldest habits. I spent the next 48 hours sitting in my downtown apartment, a cup of black coffee cooling beside my keyboard. The encrypted dashboard of the trust illuminated the dark room, providing a direct feed into the desperate, erratic financial maneuvers of my siblings. Cameron realized he could not hack my security protocols. The banking algorithms had locked him out of the legitimate capital markets. Therefore, he pivoted to the shadow economy of Anchorage. A notification pinged on my screen highlighting a sudden exorbitant deposit entering a dummy LLC registered under his name. The routing number traced back to an unlicensed private equity group notorious for predatory lending practices. They were loan sharks wearing tailored suits catering to desperate developers who could not secure traditional financing. To secure this kind of high-yield short-term capital, Cameron had to provide collateral. As the primary lien holder, my system automatically intercepted the verification request the shadow lender ran through the state database. I opened the attached file and reviewed the documents my brother had submitted to secure the loan. He had fabricated an entire alternate reality. I scrolled through pages of forged revenue projections, phantom invoices from non-existent ecotourism clients, and fabricated zoning approvals for the lakeside property. He promised the predatory lenders a 30% return on investment, pledging the physical acreage of the ecolodge as his guarantee. He was leveraging dirt he could not legally develop to borrow money he could never repay. But the loan was merely a stopgap. It provided immediate cash to placate his angry contractors, but it did not solve his ultimate problem. He needed a way to manually bypass my digital blockade and steal the commercial crabbing quotas outright. He decided to go analog. In the realm of maritime asset management, individual fishing quotas are heavily regulated by federal and state agencies. Transfers require stringent verification. Cameron understood he could not initiate a digital transfer without triggering my authorization codes. Instead, he sought out a vulnerability in the human element. My audit software flagged an unusual query on the state registry. Someone was attempting to verify the template requirements for a physical power of attorney document regarding the Borealis Trust. I traced the inquiry to the office of a local public notary with a known history of disciplinary infractions and suspended licenses. The strategy became terrifyingly clear. Cameron was using a portion of his illegal loan to bribe a corrupt state official. He intended to forge my signature on a physical, backdated power of attorney document. Armed with a notarized piece of paper granting him manual transfer rights, he planned to walk into the federal fisheries office and physically sign the multi-million-dollar quotas over to an offshore shell company. While Cameron engineered his elaborate heist, Brittany sank deeper into her own parallel delusion. The sudden freeze of her credit cards had fractured her pristine influencer facade. She could not tolerate the silent poverty of empty bank accounts. Brittany required an audience the way a fire requires oxygen. Since childhood, she had navigated the world through pageants, social media filters, and relentless outward projection, equating attention with survival. Faced with imminent bankruptcy, she decided to spend the remaining illegal loan money to purchase a glittering disguise. I opened a separate browser tab monitoring her public social media feed. She had just posted a highly produced cinematic video announcing the inaugural Alaskan Pioneer Investor Banquet. She rented the grand ballroom at the most expensive historic hotel in downtown Anchorage. She hired a string quartet, ordered imported ice sculptures, and secured premium catering. The event was marketed as an exclusive opportunity for elite venture capitalists and local politicians to buy into the ground floor of the Johnson family wilderness expansion. Brittany was constructing a lavish stage to blind the local investors with opulence. She intended to use the banquet to solicit millions of dollars in legitimate capital, hoping to funnel that new money into the ecolodge and pay off the predatory lenders before the entire house of cards collapsed. The phone on my desk buzzed, vibrating against the glass. It was Nathaniel Pierce. I answered, placing the call on speaker. The attorney sounded unusually tense. The cool, detached demeanor he typically maintained was fracturing under the weight of the liability he was witnessing on the shared dashboard. Ashley Pierce began, his voice tight and clipped. Tell me you are seeing the power of attorney inquiries and the venue deposits. I see them, Nathaniel, I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on the scrolling ledgers. Cameron is bribing a notary to forge my signature, and Brittany is spending stolen shadow capital on champagne and caviar. We need to file immediate legal injunctions, Pierce stated, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the line. I am drafting a cease and desist order for the hotel to shut down the banquet. I am also preparing an emergency freeze mandate for the Federal Fisheries Office. If Cameron walks into that building with a notarized forgery, the bureaucratic red tape required to reverse the quota transfer will take years to untangle. We have to stop them right now. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter heat ground my thoughts. In traditional legal defense, Pierce was entirely correct. You neutralize a threat the moment it appears. But I was not functioning as a defense attorney. I was an auditor finalizing a terminal report, and I understood the psychology of a con artist better than he did. Halt the injunctions, I instructed. Do not send the cease and desist orders. Do not warn the Federal Fisheries Office. There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. Ashley, they are committing textbook wire fraud and collateral manipulation. Pierce argued, his confusion evident. They are setting up a public venue to solicit fraudulent investments. If we let them proceed, the collateral damage to the local investors will be disastrous. There will be no collateral damage, I promised, my voice devoid of any hesitation. If we stop them in the shadows with private legal notices, they will simply spin a narrative of victimhood. They will claim a jealous, estranged sister used legal loopholes to oppress their brilliant business ventures. They will spend the rest of their lives maintaining the illusion that they were robbed of their success. I looked at the digital flyer for the investor banquet glowing on my monitor. I want them to take the stage, I explained. I want Cameron to put on a tuxedo and stand in front of the most powerful people in the state. I want him to hold that forged document in his pocket, feeling invincible. Destroying a fraudster in private allows their ego to survive. Letting them engineer their own indisputable ruin in the spotlight is permanent. Let them build the scaffold. Pierce let out a long, exhaled breath, the realization of my strategy settling over him. It is a terrifying gamble, he murmured, but if executed correctly, it is a terminal checkmate. I will prepare the unredacted ledgers for public display. We ended the call. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the venue was booked. 2 hours later, a courier knocked on the heavy steel door of my apartment. I signed for a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with gold foil. I carried the envelope to the kitchen island and sliced the heavy paper open. Inside rested a formal invitation to the Alaskan Pioneer Investor Banquet. A small, square, sticky note was affixed to the front of the pristine cardstock. I recognized Brittany trailing loopy handwriting immediately. Dad would hate to see you sitting alone in that depressing apartment while we celebrate the family legacy. Table 42 is near the kitchen swinging doors. Try to dress appropriately. Do not ruin our big night. It was a mocking pity invitation. She wanted me there to serve as a prop, a visual reminder to the wealthy attendees of the sister who lacked the ambition to succeed in the family business. She wanted me to witness her final desperate performance of superiority, hoping to cement my place at the bottom of the hierarchy. I stared at the sticky note. I did not feel a shred of insult or anger. Instead, a slow, predatory smile curved across my face. My sister had just handed me a front-row seat to her own funeral. The Johnson family was about to host the most expensive, highly publicized charity event in the history of Anchorage, and they were entirely unaware that the guest of honor sitting near the kitchen doors was the architect of their total destruction. I was 34 years old the day I learned exactly what my family thought my loyalty was worth: $0 and a dusty leather-bound book. The sleet drumming against the glass of the Anchorage Law Office provided a steady, freezing metronome to the morning's proceedings. Across the polished mahogany table sat my older brother, Cameron. He wore a custom-tailored fleece vest, the unofficial uniform of a man pretending his failing wilderness eco-lodge was turning a profit. Next to him, my sister Brittany adjusted the ring light attached to her phone, checking her reflection. Her Alaskan lifestyle influencer brand required constant upkeep even at our father's will reading. Mr. Caldwell, an estate attorney with 30 years of frost in his gray beard, adjusted his spectacles. He read the primary clauses with practiced detachment. The $900,000 liquid estate, the culmination of Michael Johnson's life, was to be split equally between Cameron and Brittany. Cameron exhaled a long theatrical breath, leaning back and lacing his fingers behind his head. Brittany offered a practiced, mournful pout that I knew she was testing for a future sympathy post. Then Caldwell reached into a cardboard banker's box. He pulled out a worn, heavy volume, its edges frayed from decades of handling. He slid it across the table toward me. "And to Ashley." Caldwell read, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "The Johnson Family Bible." Cameron chuckled, a sharp sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "You always were the sentimental one, Ash." He grinned, already calculating how fast he could wire his half of the cash to his contractors. "Dad knew you'd appreciate the history." I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I am a commercial lease and quota auditor. I spend my days tracking commercial fishing yields and subsurface mineral rights across the last frontier. My brain is wired for discrepancies, missing variables, and hidden ledgers. I let my fingertips trace the cracked spine of the book. As I pressed down, the leather didn't compress. There was a rigid thickness tucked deep inside the binding, a deliberate pocket of resistance right around page 47. I shifted my gaze to Caldwell. The seasoned lawyer cleared his throat and explicitly avoided meeting my eyes. He had recited the cash distribution using very specific syntax, the liquid assets as currently structured and encumbered. My siblings didn't catch the qualifier. They never paid attention to the fine print. A brief memory surfaced me at 22, sitting under the harsh fluorescent kitchen light, balancing our father's quarterly tax burdens. I spent my youth untangling his messy spreadsheets while Cameron totaled expensive snowmobiles, and Brittany funded her digital persona with Dad's credit cards. My father trusted my math. He relied on my discretion to keep the family solvent. He was a shrewd, calculating man. He wouldn't hand them a windfall and leave his only competent child with a paperweight unless the paperweight held the real value. "Drinks on me at the Captain Cook tonight," Cameron announced, slapping the table. He was already planning his victory lap, blissfully ignorant that taking unvetted liquid cash from our father's estate meant inheriting every hidden tax liability tied to those accounts. He was grabbing a poisoned chalice with both hands. I looked at my brother's triumphant face, then down at the slight bulge hidden within the weathered pages. I smiled, a quiet, genuine expression. "Thank you," I said, slipping the heavy book into my leather briefcase. "I'll treasure it." The Grand Denali Hotel sits at the edge of downtown Anchorage, a towering monument of glass and steel that casts long shadows over the freezing waters of the Cook Inlet. Its top floor boasts a panoramic ballroom offering uninterrupted views of the snow-capped Chugach Mountains. It is a venue designed exclusively for the Alaskan elite, a place where oil barons, maritime executives, and local politicians gather to broker deals over vintage wine. Renting this space requires a staggering deposit. My siblings had secured it using the absolute last cent of their predatory unlicensed shadow loan. I arrived at 7:30 in the evening, opting to remain unseen in the dimly lit vestibule just outside the main dining area. The heavy mahogany double doors were cracked open slightly, granting me a flawless, unobstructed view of the performance unfolding inside. The atmosphere was a masterclass in manufactured opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow across tables draped in heavy ivory silk. Waiters in pristine white jackets glided silently over polished hardwood floors, balancing silver trays loaded with seared king salmon, fresh oysters, and imported champagne. The sheer visual luxury stood in nauseating contrast to the terminal financial rot hidden beneath the surface. Every single crystal glass, every hors d'oeuvre, and every floral arrangement was funded by fraudulent collateral. The banquet was a glittering illusion, a hollow shell constructed by two desperate fraudsters teetering on the edge of federal prison. I watched Brittany working the room near the ice sculptures. Since we were teenagers, my sister treated every social interaction as a transactional performance. While I spent my weekends cataloging regional fishing yields to help our father manage his portfolios, Brittany competed in statewide beauty pageants, learning how to weaponize a smile and project an aura of effortless superiority. Tonight, she was deploying those exact pageant tactics on a group of prominent state senators. She wore a stunning floor-length emerald gown, laughing softly at a politician joke, while expertly steering the conversation toward her upcoming wilderness fashion brand. She spun a beautiful, entirely fictional narrative about the Johnson family commitment to sustainable Alaskan commerce. The politicians looked utterly enchanted, completely blind to the fact that the woman charming them was legally bankrupt and days away from losing her penthouse. Across the room, Cameron held court with a cluster of wealthy venture capitalists. He wore a bespoke tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch, projecting the rugged, untouchable confidence of an apex predator. Back in high school, Cameron was the star captain of the varsity hockey team. He thrived on the roar of the bleachers, needing a constant audience to validate his fragile ego. Whenever he faced a deficit on the ice, he relied on brute force and intimidation to secure a win. He was applying that same aggressive strategy to the financial sector. I observed his body language from the shadows. He leaned in close to an older investor, gesturing expansively with his free hand. He was selling them a vision of a luxury eco-lodge that would revolutionize local tourism. He was promising them exclusive stakes in pristine lakeside acreage and unparalleled returns on commercial crabbing yields. He painted a picture of an unstoppable family dynasty. It was a mesmerizing, terrifying display of psychological manipulation. He was soliciting millions of dollars in venture capital by offering shares of land and maritime quotas he did not legally control. The investors nodded eagerly, pulling out their checkbooks, captivated by the myth of the rugged Alaskan pioneer. They had no idea they were shaking hands with a man who could not even afford the scotch in his glass. I stood in the cold draft of the vestibule hallway, feeling the familiar clinical detachment of a senior auditor preparing to close a terminal ledger. I did not feel a trace of sisterly affection or pity. I simply watched the subjects of my investigation document their own crimes in front of a live, wealthy audience. Nathaniel Pierce stood silently to my left. The ruthless estate attorney wore a sharp charcoal suit, his face carved into a mask of pure, calculating anticipation. Standing directly behind him was a phalanx of top-tier corporate litigators from his firm. They were men and women who specialized in unraveling complex financial fraud. Each attorney held a thick, heavy leather briefcase. Those briefcases contained unredacted financial ledgers, authenticated subsurface mineral deeds, and formal foreclosure notices. We were a quiet, lethal army waiting for the precise moment to strike. The pacing of the evening began to accelerate. The waiters cleared the dinner plates, and the ambient chatter in the room gradually faded as a hush fell over the crowd. The string quartet positioned in the corner transitioned to a soft classical melody, providing a sophisticated backdrop for the main event. Cameron handed his scotch glass to a passing server and adjusted his tuxedo jacket. He walked toward a raised wooden stage positioned at the front of the ballroom, illuminated by a crisp white spotlight. A massive digital screen hung behind the podium, displaying a pristine high-definition rendering of the proposed eco-lodge. The image showed a sprawling glass-walled resort nestled against the frozen lake, surrounded by towering pines. The audience turned their chairs toward the stage, their attention entirely captured. Brittany took a seat at the front table, folding her manicured hands in her lap, her eyes shining with anticipated victory. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cameron began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing perfectly across the vaulted ceiling. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the dawn of a new era for the last frontier." A polite ripple of applause washed over the room. Cameron offered a practiced, humble smile, gripping the edges of the wooden podium. "For decades, my father, Michael Johnson, built a legacy of responsible, lucrative resource management." Cameron continued, his tone swelling with manufactured pride. "Brittany and I are proud to carry that torch forward. We are not just maintaining his empire, we are expanding it. The Eco-Lodge you see projected behind me is just the beginning. We are integrating high-end wilderness hospitality with our grandfathered commercial fishing quotas, creating an unparalleled sustainable investment portfolio." He paused, letting the magnitude of his pitch settle over the wealthy crowd. I watched the venture capitalists leaning forward, their eyes locked on the rendering. They were sharks, smelling blood in the water, eager to sink their teeth into a lucrative venture. But to execute this vision at the highest possible standard, we are opening our doors to select partners, Cameron announced, shifting his pitch into its final lethal phase. We are offering exclusive equity shares in the lakeside property and the associated maritime quotas. We are looking for an initial capital injection of $5 million to mobilize our construction crews before the spring thaw. The room was entirely silent, hanging on his every word. He was inches away from securing the funds he needed to pay off his shadow lenders and escape the financial abyss. He believed he had won. He thought he had successfully outrun his debts, outsmarted his sister, and secured his kingdom. I turned my head and looked at Nathaniel Pierce. The attorney met my gaze, raising a single eyebrow in silent inquiry. I gave him a curt, definitive nod. The time for observation was over. I reached out and grasped the heavy brass handles of the mahogany double doors. With a single fluid motion, I pushed them wide open. The heavy wood slammed against the wall stops with a resounding percussive crack. The sudden violent noise ricocheted across the ballroom like a gunshot. The string quartet stopped playing instantly, the cellist dragging a harsh, discordant note across the strings in sheer surprise. The warm, golden atmosphere of the banquet shattered. 500 of the wealthiest individuals in the state turned their heads simultaneously, their eyes snapping away from the glowing digital rendering to stare at the entrance. I stepped over the threshold and into the light. I did not wear a glittering evening gown. I wore a tailored razor-sharp midnight blue business suit. I carried no purse, only a sleek black folder holding the unredacted truth. Pierce and the imposing wall of corporate litigators stepped in right behind me, moving in perfect synchronized formation. We did not look like invited guests. We looked like a federal execution squad. Cameron froze at the podium. The color drained from his face with terrifying speed, leaving him looking like a polished corpse under the bright spotlight. His hands gripped the edges of the wood so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. Brittany gasped, standing up from her chair at the front table, her flawless influencer mask cracking into a portrait of unadulterated horror. I did not pause. I did not hesitate. I began my march down the center aisle, my heels clicking a steady, relentless rhythm against the polished hardwood floor, driving straight toward the stage to dismantle their entire reality. The silence in the ballroom felt heavy, stretching across the expansive space like a taut steel cable. My heels struck the polished oak floor, a rhythmic, deliberate beat, cutting through the sudden quiet. The venture capitalists and local politicians parted instinctively, creating a wide aisle for my team. Nathaniel Pierce walked at my right shoulder, his face a mask of calculated stone. Behind him, our litigators moved in perfect unison, their heavy leather briefcases clutching the unredacted truth. I kept my eyes locked onto the stage. Cameron stood frozen behind the wooden podium. His bespoke tuxedo seemed to hang loosely on his frame all of a sudden, the confident posture melting away. The color drained from his face, leaving a pale, terrified sheen under the harsh spotlight. Brittany remained rooted to her chair at the front table, her knuckles stark white as she gripped the silk tablecloth, her influencer smile shattering into genuine dread. Cameron blinked, breaking his paralysis. His survival instinct kicked in, triggering the old hockey captain reflexes that demanded physical control of the arena. "Security!" Cameron shouted, his voice cracking over the microphone, echoing awkwardly off the crystal chandeliers. "Remove this woman. She is trespassing." Two burly hotel guards stationed near the ice sculptures moved to intercept us. They stepped into the center aisle, raising their hands to halt my progression. I did not break my stride. I did not even look at them. Nathaniel Pierce stepped smoothly forward, intercepting the guards before they could reach me. Pierce did not shout. He reached into his tailored charcoal jacket and produced a thick official document bearing a raised federal seal. He held the paperwork inches from the lead guard's face. "This is a federal audit mandate." Pierce stated, his tone carrying the chilling weight of a seasoned prosecutor. "We are executing a lawful financial seizure of the entities presenting on that stage. If you interfere with this corporate action, you will be arrested for obstructing a federal investigation. Step aside." The guards read the seal, exchanged a nervous glance, and retreated immediately to the perimeter. They were hotel employees. They had zero intention of wrestling with federal directives for a client who might not even be able to pay the catering bill. I reached the wooden stairs leading up to the stage. My pulse remained remarkably steady. For 30 years, my family had conditioned me to shrink away from conflict, to blend into the background while they consumed the oxygen in the room. Tonight, I was consuming the entire atmosphere. I climbed the steps. Cameron stumbled backward, creating distance as I approached the podium. I did not ask for permission. I stepped into his space, using my shoulder to physically edge him away from the microphone stand. He yielded without a fight, shrinking back toward the edge of the platform, eyes darting around the room for an escape route that did not exist. I pulled a sleek silver flash drive from my suit pocket. I plugged it directly into the audiovisual control deck resting on the side of the podium. The towering digital screen behind us flickered. The pristine high-definition rendering of the luxury Eco Lodge vanished into the digital ether. In its place, a harsh, glaring white spreadsheet illuminated the ballroom. The sudden change in lighting cast stark shadows across the faces of the wealthy attendees. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as they squinted at the towering columns of red text detailing shadow loans and negative balances. My voice carried clearly through the microphone, smooth and resonant. "Good evening," I said, looking out over the sea of bewildered faces. "My name is Ashley Johnson. My brother just introduced himself as the visionary behind this wilderness expansion. He promised you exclusive equity in pristine lakeside acreage and unparalleled returns on commercial fishing quotas." I paused, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second. There is just one minor problem with his pitch. Cameron Johnson does not own a single inch of that land, and he possesses zero legal rights to those maritime yields. The murmur in the crowd amplified into a buzzing wave of confusion. State senators leaned forward in their chairs. Investment bankers set down their champagne flutes. I kept my posture rigid, dominating the stage. "I am the sole beneficiary and chief executive officer of the Borealis Resource Trust," I announced, projecting my authority to the back of the room. "My trust holds the grandfathered subsurface mineral deeds for the proposed construction site. Furthermore, the trust retains the senior secured lien on every single corporate entity my brother operates. The man standing on this stage is insolvent. The spreadsheets projected behind me detail his genuine financial standing. He is currently carrying staggering debts from unlicensed private shadow lenders, and he intended to use your venture capital to pay off his loan sharks." The ballroom descended into chaos. Politicians whispered frantically to their aides. Wealthy elites reached for their phones, rushing to text their legal teams. Cameron gripped the edge of the stage curtains, gasping for air. "This is a lie!" Cameron shrieked, his voice raw and stripped of all its prior charm. "She is a disgruntled sister. She hacked the system to forge these documents. Do not listen to her. I have a primary investor ready to back this project right now." He pointed a trembling finger toward the center of the front row. "Wyatt, tell them. Tell them about our term sheet." A tall man in a sharp navy suit stood up from his front row seat. Wyatt had spent the entire evening sipping sparkling water, nodding along to my brother's ambitious pitch, acting the part of an eager, deep-pocketed oil executive. Wyatt adjusted his cuffs and turned to face the agitated crowd. He did not look at Cameron. "My name is Wyatt Bennett," the man stated, his voice booming effortlessly across the room without needing a microphone. "I am not a venture capitalist. I am a senior forensic auditor for Apex Financial Investigations. Miss Johnson hired my firm 3 weeks ago to conduct an independent verification of her brother's corporate filings." Wyatt reached into his breast pocket and produced his official credentials, holding them up for the surrounding elites to witness. He turned his attention to the stage, pinning Cameron with a look of pure, unadulterated professional disgust. "Your financial projections are a fabricated fantasy, Cameron. I spent the last 2 hours gathering verbal confirmation of your intent to commit wire fraud. You just tried to sell phantom equity to 500 of the most influential people in Alaska." The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. The illusion was dead, exposed by an undercover operative planted directly in the center of their glittering trap. Brittany let out a choked, guttural sob, collapsing back into her chair, realizing her social status was turning to ash in front of her eyes. The influencers and local socialites she had courted were already physically backing away from her table, treating her like a toxic contagion. Cameron snapped. The cornered animal within him broke through the last remaining veneer of sanity. He lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of desperate panic. "It is a forgery," Cameron screamed, spit flying from his lips as he pointed frantically at the towering spreadsheets. "She paid him to say that." "The trust is a lie. I have the legal authority to transfer those fishing quotas, and I can prove it. I have the signed paperwork in my possession right now." The threat was empty to the audience, but to me, it was the exact cue I needed. Cameron was backed into a corner, and rather than surrendering, he was preparing to present the forged power of attorney document he believed would save him. He had just confessed to holding fraudulent paperwork in front of a room full of witnesses, setting the stage for the final devastating evidence drop. Cameron pointed a trembling finger at the towering digital screens, his face slick with panic sweat. He claimed he possessed the legal authority to transfer the fishing quotas. He boasted about holding signed paperwork in his pocket, desperate to convince the room that my presentation was a fabrication. He thought his secret was safe. He thought he could bluff his way through a room full of seasoned investors. My finger rested on the presentation remote. I clicked the forward button. The sprawling financial spreadsheets vanished from the 40-foot displays. In their place, a high-definition scan of a legal document illuminated the ballroom. It was a State of Alaska Power of Attorney form. The text was crisp and undeniable. At the bottom of the page rested a signature that spelled out my name right next to a blue notary stamp. I leaned into the microphone. My voice filled the silent, cavernous space, carrying the steady, chilling cadence of a lead auditor closing a terminal report. "You mean this paperwork, Cameron?" I asked. I watched his eyes dart toward the screen. The color drained from his neck. The document he thought was safely hidden in his tuxedo jacket was projected 40 feet high for every venture capitalist in the room to read. He took a stumbling step backward, his mouth opening and closing in shock. "Let us walk through the reality of this investment opportunity," I announced to the crowd, turning my attention away from my brother and focusing on the wealthy elite. Many of you read the local business journals. You assume my brother inherited near $1 million in liquid cash to fund the initial stage of this eco-lodge. You believe he possesses a financial safety net. He does not. I clicked the remote again. A redacted federal tax line replaced the forgery on the left side of the screen. The cash he inherited was explicitly tethered to a deferred Internal Revenue Service estate tax liability, I explained, keeping my tone flat and precise. At 8 o'clock yesterday morning, the federal government seized every single penny of that inheritance to cover the debt. My brother is standing before you with a bank balance of zero. He does not have the capital to pour a concrete foundation, let alone build a luxury wilderness resort. A low, dangerous murmur spread across the front tables. The men who had been reaching for their checkbooks slowly pulled their hands away. The atmosphere in the room shifted from intrigued excitement to cold, calculating suspicion. Desperate to cover his tracks and mobilize his contractors, Cameron sought alternative funding. I continued pacing slowly across the stage. He secured a high-interest loan from an unlicensed private lender here in Anchorage. He used the lakeside property as his collateral. But, as I established moments ago, he does not own the subsurface rights. His collateral is worthless. He committed loan fraud to rent this ballroom. Cameron shook his head, gripping his hair. He paced in a tight, erratic circle on the stage. "It is a lie," he repeated, though his voice lacked any conviction. He sounded like a broken record playing to an empty room. To pay back those dangerous shadow lenders, he needed something of real value, I explained to the captivated audience. He needed the commercial fishing quotas held by the Borealis Resource Trust. But the trust requires my specific authorization for any transfer. So my brother took a portion of his illegal loan and bribed a local notary. He forged my signature on a physical document, intending to walk into a federal fisheries office and manually steal the assets. The document you see on the screen is a digital capture of that exact forgery, intercepted by my security protocols. Wyatt, the undercover forensic auditor sitting in the front row, stood up once more. He turned his back on the stage and faced the crowd. "My firm has cross-referenced the notary stamp and the federal filing numbers displayed on that screen," Wyatt stated, his voice ringing with undeniable authority. "The stamp belongs to an official whose license was suspended 6 months ago due to severe ethical violations. The signature is a documented forgery. If you invest in this venture, you are funneling your capital into a criminal enterprise. You will be subject to federal wire fraud investigations by association. The word federal acted like a trigger. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom shifted from stunned fascination to visceral panic. The Alaskan elite do not tolerate legal exposure. Wealthy oil executives and prominent politicians immediately stood up from their tables. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the room as investors ripped up the checks they had written just minutes prior. Cameron stepped forward, holding his hands out in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Wait," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "Do not leave. The project is solid. The land is pristine. We can make a deal. I can fix the paperwork." Nobody looked at him. They were too busy pulling on their tailored overcoats and instructing their aides to delete all correspondence with the Johnson family. The venture capitalists he had spent the entire evening charming treated him like a ghost. I turned my attention away from the crumbling patriarch and looked down at the front table. Brittany was still sitting there. Her emerald gown, which had looked so radiant an hour ago, now seemed like a heavy, suffocating costume. She was clutching her designer handbag against her chest, her eyes wide with terror as she watched her curated social circle flee the room. I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at my sister. Nathaniel Pierce stepped up beside me. He reached into his leather briefcase and handed me a thick, sealed manila envelope. "Brittany," I said, not needing the microphone for my voice to reach her over the commotion of the retreating guests. "You built an entire lifestyle brand on the illusion of pioneer independence. You sold your followers a narrative of effortless wealth. You mocked my lifestyle while secretly funding yours with stolen capital." I tossed the envelope. It landed squarely on the ivory silk tablecloth in front of her, sliding until it hit her untouched champagne glass. "Those are formal foreclosure notices," I informed her, ensuring the few socialites lingering near the exit heard every single word. "You attempted to leverage your portion of the non-existent inheritance to secure a line of credit. When that failed, you maxed out every personal credit card you own to fund this ballroom rental and your imported ice sculptures. You are defaulting on your luxury penthouse. Your vehicles are scheduled for repossession tomorrow morning. You are entirely insolvent." Brittany let out a jagged, breathless sob. The pristine influencer facade shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Her mascara ran in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked around the room, seeking a sympathetic face, a friend to tell her it was a misunderstanding. The local politicians and fashion designers she had courted all evening actively averted their eyes. They stepped around her table as if she carried a deadly virus. They were eradicating her from their social registry in real time. Within 10 minutes, the grand ballroom was a ghost town. The catering staff had vanished, sensing the toxic shift in the room and realizing they were never going to receive their final payment. The string quartet had packed their instruments and slipped out a side door. The only sounds remaining were the hum of the crystal chandeliers and the ragged, uneven breathing of my two siblings. The tables were littered with half-eaten caviar, abandoned wine glasses, and discarded promotional brochures. The physical remnants of a spectacular failure lay scattered across the expensive hardwood floor. I stood on the stage, looking out over the empty room. For 30 years, they had mocked my quiet diligence. They had branded me the boring, sentimental sister fit only to balance their checkbooks and fade into the background. They had evicted me from my sanctuary just to prove they could. Now they possessed nothing. Their reputations were ash. Their credit was destroyed. They were isolated in a room they could not afford to rent, surrounded by the debris of their own arrogance. I unclipped the wireless microphone from my lapel and set it gently on the wooden podium. The dull thump echoed through the silent hall, signaling the end of the audit. "My work here is done," I said softly to Nathaniel Pierce. The lawyer nodded, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. "We have teams positioned at their corporate offices," Pierce replied, adjusting his briefcase. "The locks will be changed by midnight." I turned my back on Cameron and Brittany. I did not offer a parting insult. I did not wait for an apology. I walked down the stage steps and headed toward the main exit, my legal team falling into step behind me. But I knew Cameron. I knew the specific breed of cornered desperation running through his veins. He still had the physical forged document in his pocket. He had lost the public war and his reputation was ruined, but he would try one last ruinous maneuver in the shadows. Stripped of all logic, he would attempt to force the federal government to accept his lie. The final trap was waiting for him, and I knew he was arrogant enough to step right into it. The dawn breaking over the Chugach Mountains did not offer a gentle awakening for the Anchorage elite. It arrived with a blinding, sterile clarity, illuminating the devastation left in the wake of the investor banquet. By 6 in the morning, the primary Alaskan business journals and maritime trade publications had published their digital editions. The headlines were ruthless and immediate. The Johnson family name, once a formidable symbol of pioneering resilience and commercial success, was instantly transformed into a cautionary tale of corporate fraud. The articles detailed the fabricated eco-lodge projections, the shadow loans, and the breathtaking audacity of soliciting venture capital without owning the underlying collateral. The state financial sector moves with remarkable, unforgiving speed when protecting its own interests. Within hours, local banks severed all remaining ties, freezing any auxiliary accounts that had not already been seized by the Internal Revenue Service. The politicians and venture capitalists who had attended the gala initiated preemptive legal filings to distance their portfolios from my brother. Cameron and Brittany were officially designated as financial pariahs. Their social currency was entirely depleted, and the cold legal reality of their insolvency settled over them like a winter storm. My legal team, directed by Nathaniel Pierce, executed the physical asset seizures with surgical precision. At 8 in the morning, independent contractors arrived at the luxury commercial building where Cameron leased his executive office space. They changed the electronic security codes, padlocked the heavy glass doors, and posted formal foreclosure notices directly on the window panes. Down by the harbor, maritime recovery agents secured the company vessels he had used as fraudulent collateral for his shadow loans. Simultaneously, a separate legal unit arrived at the downtown luxury high-rise where my sister resided. Brittany was given exactly 1 hour to gather her personal belongings under the watchful eye of a private security guard. She stood on the freezing sidewalk and watched as tow trucks hauled away her imported sport utility vehicle. She had spent years cultivating a pristine digital aesthetic, funding a lavish lifestyle with diverted capital and unearned credit. Now she stood on the icy pavement, clutching a single designer suitcase possessing zero access to the wealth she had flaunted. The concept of poetic justice rarely manifests in the real world, but when it does, it possesses a chilling, undeniable symmetry. Stripped of their stolen capital and evicted from their luxury dwellings, Cameron and Brittany were forced to relocate to a decaying cinderblock motel situated on the desolate outskirts of the Seward Highway. The establishment catered to transient workers and desperate individuals who had run out of options. The neon sign out front flickered with broken tubes, casting a sickly red glow over a cracked, snow-covered parking lot. I received a brief logistical report from Pierce outlining their new location. The irony was profound. For 3 years, Brittany had commodified the harsh Alaskan element, selling her online followers a glamorous, sanitized version of wilderness survival. She wore designer parkas and posed in front of pristine glaciers, pretending to embrace the rugged frontier while sleeping in a heated penthouse. Now she was trapped in a drafty, unheated motel room that smelled of stale tobacco and damp mildew. The biting coastal wind rattled the thin window panes, forcing her to experience the raw, unforgiving reality of the environment she had exploited for internet traffic. She had no ring light, no catered meals, and no adoring audience to witness her misery. I was sitting in my secure downtown apartment reviewing the finalized Borealis Resource Trust ledgers when my personal cell phone vibrated against the glass desk. The caller identification displayed a restricted number. I knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. I accepted the call and lifted the device to my ear, remaining perfectly silent. "Ashley, please do not hang up on me." The voice emitting from the speaker was barely recognizable. The polished, breathy cadence my sister utilized for her lifestyle brand was entirely gone. It was replaced by a jagged, desperate rasp thick with unshed tears and profound exhaustion. I did not respond. I simply listened to the sound of her shivering over the cellular connection. "We have nothing," Brittany wept, her composure fracturing into pathetic, broken sobs. "The room is freezing. The heater does not work, and maintenance will not answer the phone." Cameron has been pacing the floor for hours and he will not speak to me. My credit cards are declining at the vending machine in the lobby. We do not even have money for coffee. She paused, waiting for the familiar wave of sisterly pity that had always saved her in the past. For 3 decades, I had been trained to absorb her discomfort to offer my own resources to shield her from the consequences of her vanity. She expected the conditioned response to kick in. She expected me to sigh, offer a sympathetic word, and wire a few $100s to tide them over until they could formulate a new plan. I felt the steady, calm beating of my own heart. The emotional conditioning that had bound me to their toxic orbit was severed, cauterized by the cold facts of the audit and the sheer scale of their betrayal. I looked at the spreadsheet on my monitor, observing the millions of dollars they had attempted to steal from my grandfathered trust. I felt zero guilt. I felt the profound, liberating emptiness of a closed account. "Ashley, I am begging you," Brittany pleaded, her voice dropping into a frantic, humiliating whisper. "I know we treated you terribly. I know I was cruel at the cabin. I will do anything to fix this. I will come to your office and scrub the floors. I will clean the windows. I just need $100 for groceries. Please. You are my sister. You cannot just leave me here to freeze." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, gazing out the window at the snow-capped peaks looming in the distance. "You evicted me from my home in the middle of winter to build a swimming pool," I stated, keeping my tone mild and clinically detached. "You laughed while doing it on a live broadcast. You helped your brother try to destroy my commercial consulting business to save your own vanity projects. You are not my family. You are simply a defaulted debtor. But I am sorry," she wailed, the sheer panic of her isolation taking hold. "I can change. We can be a real family now that the money is gone." "Boundaries are not negotiations," Brittany, I replied, cleanly stripping away any remaining hope she harbored. "You spent 30 years withdrawing from an account you never deposited into. The ledger is balanced. Do not ever contact me again." I ended the call before she could utter another sound. I navigated to my phone settings and permanently blocked the number. The action felt like closing a heavy steel vault door, sealing away a toxic chapter of my life forever. I set the device back on the desk, savoring the pristine quiet of my apartment. The defensive phase of my father's contingency plan was officially concluded. They were disarmed, bankrupted, and exiled from the Anchorage business community. I turned my attention back to the encrypted dashboard of the Borealis Resource Trust, ready to begin organizing the sustainable fisheries expansion. I planned to review the seasonal yield charts, but my focus was immediately broken by a shrill, pulsing alarm emanating from the computer speakers. A crimson alert banner flashed across the top of my monitor. The cybersecurity overlay I had integrated into the Federal Maritime Registry was triggering a high-priority notification. I clicked the flashing icon, opening the live tracking log. My eyes scanned the incoming data packets, my pulse accelerating as the sheer magnitude of the new threat materialized on the screen. Cameron had not surrendered. The crushing humiliation of the banquet and the reality of the freezing motel had not broken his ego. The public execution of his character had driven him into a state of profound, reckless delusion. The alert indicated that an unauthorized individual was currently attempting to access the restricted commercial crabbing quota databases. But the access attempt was not originating from a remote server, a shadow laptop, or a hidden offshore location. The geolocation tracker pinpointed the exact origin of the inquiry. It was coming from a physical terminal inside the Anchorage field office of the Federal Fisheries Department. Cameron had taken his forged, notarized power of attorney document, marched past federal security guards, and approached a government clerk. In a last-ditch, suicidal effort to salvage his ruined pioneer fantasy, he was attempting to manually execute the asset transfer in person. He believed he could bypass my digital blockade by sliding a fraudulent piece of paper across a government counter, forcing the federal bureaucracy to recognize his theft and grant him control of the multi-million-dollar quotas. He was standing inside a federal building presenting a forged signature to a federal employee attempting to steal maritime assets. The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. He had escalated his crime from civil misrepresentation into a severe federal felony, and he was committing the act under the blinding glare of government surveillance cameras. I did not panic. I did not reach for my phone to call Nathaniel Pierce to send an injunction. A slow, predatory calm settled over my senses. Cameron was walking directly into the final, inescapable trap, and I was going to watch him lock the cage from the inside. The glaring crimson alert on my monitor pulsed like a digital heartbeat. I stared at the geolocation coordinates pinging from the Anchorage field office of the National Marine Fisheries Service. Cameron had bypassed logic. He had taken his fake notarized power of attorney and walked right through the metal detectors of a United States government building. He was standing at a clerk counter gripping a fraudulent document, sweating through his stale clothing from that freezing motel. He intended to manually transfer the commercial crabbing quotas out of the Borealis Resource Trust and into an offshore shell company to satisfy his loan sharks. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. My hand hovered over the keyboard. I possessed the security clearance to lock down the federal database remotely. I could freeze the terminal, sound an alarm, and stop the transaction before the clerk even finished reading his name. The instinct of a standard security protocol is to block the breach. But I am not a security guard. I am a forensic auditor. When we were teenagers, our father took us caribou hunting in the deep tundra. Cameron lacked patience. He would fire his rifle at the first shadow moving in the brush, scaring the herd away and wasting his ammunition. My father taught me a different method. He told me to watch the tracks, wait for the animal to commit to a path, and only pull the trigger when the target stepped into an unavoidable clearing. Today, the clearing was a federal registry. If I blocked Cameron now, he would face charges for attempted fraud. A clever defense attorney could argue he was confused, stressed, or unaware the notary stamp was invalid. He might plead down to a misdemeanor and escape prison time. I required a permanent solution. I needed him to cross the threshold of a federal crime, where intent and execution were recorded in indelible ink. I routed my display to mirror the specific terminal the government clerk was using. A live feed of the transaction data populated my screen. I watched the keystrokes appear as the clerk typed Cameron Johnson into the transfer request field. My brother was handing over the paperwork. I could picture his forced, charming smile, the twitch in his jaw, the desperate energy vibrating off his frame as he tried to act like a legitimate maritime executive. The clerk scanned the forged power of attorney into the federal system. A high-resolution image of the document materialized on my monitor. There was my name forged in Cameron erratic handwriting resting next to the invalid blue seal. The system prompted a secondary verification check. A dialog box appeared on my screen, requesting authorization from the primary lien holder to proceed with the quota reassignment. I took a slow, deep breath. The air in my apartment was still tasting faintly of roasted coffee and cold glass. The contrast between our realities was striking. Cameron was standing in a fluorescent-lit government lobby, his pulse hammering against his ribs, gambling his entire freedom on a single piece of paper. I was sitting in silence, holding his fate at the tip of my index finger. I did not click the rejection button. I engaged a localized dummy server protocol I had built for testing audit software. I routed the clerk terminal into an isolated mirrored environment that looked identical to the live registry. To the clerk and to my brother, the system appeared to accept the paperwork. To me, it created a pristine, time-stamped quarantine chamber capturing every element of the felony. I clicked Approve on the mirrored server. The transaction processed. The digital confirmation receipt populated on the screen. Cameron had officially submitted a forged document to a federal employee to steal multi-million-dollar maritime assets. The ink was dry. The submission was logged. By handing that paper across the counter, he upgraded his desperate scheme to felony wire fraud, identity theft, and perjury against the United States government. A new notification pinged. The clerk generated a physical printout for Cameron to sign, finalizing the chain of custody. I watched the digital signature capture pad record his handwriting in real time. The cursive loops matched the forged signature, perfectly tying him undeniably to the creation of the document. He was digging his own grave, and he was proud of the depth. I imagined his relief in that moment. He probably thanked the clerk, tucked his copy of the receipt into his coat, and walked out of the double glass doors feeling like a genius. He believed he had outsmarted the system. He thought the quotas were currently routing to his shadow lenders, buying him time to resurrect his eco-lodge fantasy. He had no idea the transfer was sitting in a digital vacuum, serving only as Exhibit A for a federal prosecutor. I closed the mirrored server and opened a blank secure file directory. I began dragging the compiled evidence into a neatly organized folder: the scanned forgery, the digital signature pad capture, the IP address logs tracking the exact terminal used at the Anchorage field office. I included the verified subsurface mineral deeds and the Borealis Trust documentation proving I never authorized the transfer. I opened a secondary secure portal connecting my workstation to the external surveillance network of the federal building. Operating under the Freedom of Information Act protocols I frequently utilized for maritime investigations, I requested a localized copy of the lobby security footage for the exact time frame of the transaction. Within minutes, a grainy video file downloaded to my desktop. I clicked play. The black and white footage showed Cameron pacing nervously near the counter. His posture was rigid. He repeatedly wiped his palms on his trousers, checking his phone every 10 seconds. He looked exactly like a guilty man committing a severe crime. When the clerk handed him the receipt, his shoulders slumped in overwhelming relief. He practically sprinted out of the frame. I added the video file to the evidence folder. I labeled the entire directory with a simple clinical title: Johnson Fraud Submission. I zipped the file and encrypted it with a high-level security key. The trap was armed, loaded, and locked. The tension that had hovered over my shoulders for the past week finally evaporated, replaced by a profound, chilling clarity. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a direct extension I kept saved in my contacts. It belonged to Special Agent Reynolds, a seasoned investigator at the Anchorage field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We had collaborated on several maritime quota fraud cases in the past. He was a meticulous, unyielding officer who despised white-collar criminals exploiting the Alaskan economy. The line rang twice before he answered. "Agent Reynolds," I said, maintaining my crisp, professional tone. "I have a comprehensive forensic packet ready for your review. It contains time-stamped video surveillance, digital footprint logs, and physical forgery documentation regarding an attempt to steal protected commercial fishing quotas." "Send it over," Ashley Reynolds replied, the sound of a chair squeaking in the background. "Who is the target?" "My brother Cameron Johnson," I stated clearly. "He just finalized a fraudulent asset transfer at the federal fisheries counter 20 minutes ago. The evidence is irrefutable." There was a brief pause on the line. Reynolds understood the gravity of an auditor turning in her own family member. He did not ask for personal context. He recognized the tone of a professional delivering an open and shut case. "I will have a tactical team review the file immediately," Reynolds confirmed. "We will secure the arrest warrants by this evening." "Where is he currently located?" I provided the address of the decaying cinderblock motel on the Seward Highway. I ended the call and hit send on the encrypted email. The heavy lifting was done. My brother had spent his entire life believing the rules did not apply to him. Tomorrow morning, he was going to receive a very loud, inescapable wake-up call. The Alaskan dawn broke over the Turnagain Arm in shades of bruised purple and fractured gray. I sat in the driver's seat of my truck parked on the gravel shoulder directly across from the decaying motel on the Seward Highway. The truck heater blasted warm air against my heavy boots, carrying the faint, familiar scent of engine dust and old coffee. I rolled the window down a fraction of an inch, letting the freezing coastal wind bite at my cheek. I wanted to feel the cold. I wanted my senses sharp and awake for every single second of the impending reckoning. For 3 decades, I had occupied the silent background of my own life, serving as the invisible infrastructure that kept my siblings insulated from reality. I absorbed their financial mistakes, balanced their recurring deficits, and swallowed their daily insults. They operated under the assumption that my compliance was a permanent, unchangeable trait woven into my DNA like a subservient flaw. They never understood the fundamental psychology of my profession. An auditor does not judge a faulty ledger with hot anger or sudden outbursts. An auditor observes the discrepancies, records the missing variables, and waits in the shadows for the final tally to expose the truth. Today, the books were closing permanently. At exactly 6:15 in the morning, the empty horizon yielded a procession of dark silhouettes. 5 unmarked sport utility vehicles drove down the icy highway in tight, disciplined formation. They did not utilize sirens. They did not flash their roof lights. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not announce its arrival when executing a high-flight risk felony warrant. The vehicles pulled into the snow-packed parking lot of the motel, their heavy tires crushing the frozen puddles and cracking the ice with a sound like shattering glass. Tactical agents poured out of the vehicles before the engines even cut off their boots, hitting the pavement with synchronized precision. They wore dark tactical gear bearing crisp yellow lettering across their backs, their faces obscured by focused purpose. Special Agent Reynolds directed the perimeter, moving with the unyielding authority of a man who dealt exclusively in undeniable facts. The team converged on room number 12. The door was a flimsy piece of hollow core wood, its peeling green paint exposing the rot underneath the frame. An agent pounded a heavy fist against the wood, shouting federal commands that echoed sharply off the surrounding cinderblock walls. When the rusted lock did not turn, a steel battering ram shattered the doorframe into flying splinters. The strike sounded like a dry tree branch snapping in a quiet forest. I watched through the windshield as the tactical team flooded the cramped, unlit room. Muffled shouts spilled out into the frigid air, a chaotic mix of strict federal directives and frantic sleep-deprived protests. Less than 2 minutes later, Cameron emerged into the dawn. 2 agents held him firmly by the arms, marching him out into the biting wind. He was barefoot, wearing the wrinkled suit trousers from the disastrous banquet and a stained undershirt. His hands were bound tightly behind his back with cold steel handcuffs. He stumbled over the icy threshold, his knees buckling slightly, forcing the agents to bear his weight as he dragged his bare feet across the frozen concrete walkway. The golden boy of the Anchorage elite was stripped of his bespoke tuxedo and his manufactured confidence. He was reduced to a trembling, disoriented suspect shivering in the morning frost. Agent Reynolds stepped in front of my brother holding a printed warrant. The agent projected his voice over the distant highway noise, crisp and unrelenting. He read the Miranda warnings followed by the specific list of charges: corporate embezzlement, federal wire fraud, perjury, identity theft against a United States government agency. Each charge landed like a hammer, striking an anvil, driving the reality of his situation deeper into his fracturing mind. Cameron shook his head frantically, his uncombed hair plastered to his forehead with cold sweat. He tried to speak, attempting to deploy the same charismatic charm he used to hustle venture capitalists at country clubs. He offered a strained, desperate smile, explaining to the federal officers that it was a simple misunderstanding, a minor paperwork error regarding a private family trust. Agent Reynolds did not even blink. The seasoned investigator simply nodded to his tactical team, instructing them to move the suspect toward the rear door of the transport vehicle. A moment later, Brittany was escorted out of the ruined doorway. She was not handcuffed, as her signature was not on the forged federal document, but her reality was equally devastating. A female agent guided her to the curb and instructed her to remain on the property until the search concluded. My sister wore a designer silk robe over thermal leggings, her feet shoved into unlaced winter boots. She wrapped her arms tightly around her chest, her teeth chattering audibly in the freezing air. 2 agents emerged from the motel room carrying her belongings. Because she lacked a proper suitcase, they had stuffed her remaining possessions into heavy-duty black plastic trash bags provided by the motel housekeeping cart. They dropped the bags onto the icy asphalt at her feet. The plastic tore against the jagged gravel, spilling a tangle of imported cashmere sweaters and high-end cosmetics into the frozen mud. Brittany stared down at the trash bags, her entire influencer aesthetic reduced to literal garbage. The society she worshipped had abandoned her, the wealth she flaunted was seized, and she was left standing on the side of a desolate highway, entirely alone. As the agent steered Cameron toward the transport vehicle, his frantic gaze swept the surrounding area, searching the empty highway for a defense attorney or a sympathetic witness. His eyes swept past the flickering neon motel sign and locked onto my truck parked across the 2-lane road. He saw me sitting behind the steering wheel. The realization hit him with physical crushing force. The confusion evaporated from his pale face, replaced by a sudden sickening clarity. He knew I had built the digital trap. He knew I had watched him walk into the federal building. Ashley Cameron screamed, his voice tearing at his vocal cords, echoing over the desolate landscape. The sound was raw, stripped of all pride and ego. He fought against the agents, gripping his arms, dragging his heels against the pavement to stall his forward momentum. Ashley, tell them. Tell them it is our trust. Tell them it is a family misunderstanding. We are blood. You have to help me. I am your brother. I turned off the truck engine. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The coastal wind whipped my hair across my face, but I did not bother to button my coat. I walked to the edge of the asphalt, stopping precisely at the painted white line dividing the highway. I stood tall, my posture relaxed, meeting his panicked stare with the clinical, unyielding gaze of a senior investigator. I am not your family, Cameron. I stated, my voice projecting across the quiet expanse of the road, carrying the steady resonance of undeniable truth. I am just the auditor who reported the discrepancies. The dramatic irony settled over the freezing parking lot. The very title he had mocked the profession he had belittled as boring and sentimental during the will reading was the exact mechanism of his ruin. He had demanded I stay in my place and mind the spreadsheets. I had done exactly what he asked. I followed the numbers, and the numbers led directly to his federal indictment. Cameron opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The final defense mechanism of his ego collapsed inward. The agents pushed his head down, securing him inside the back of the dark vehicle. The heavy metal door slammed shut, sealing away his empty promises and his pioneer fantasies, forever. I looked over at Brittany. She was sitting on the frozen curb, her knees pulled to her chest, surrounded by the torn plastic bags and ruined designer clothes. She did not look up. She did not ask for help. She was staring blankly at the ice, the profound weight of her isolation crushing the last fragments of her vanity. She was a ghost haunting her own ruined life. I turned my back on the flashing lights of the federal convoy. I walked back to my truck, my boots crunching a steady, unhurried rhythm against the gravel. I climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing out the biting wind. The oppressive parasitic weight that had anchored itself to my spine for 3 decades was gone. The emotional extortion, the gaslighting, the endless demands for unearned loyalty were erased, carried away in the back of a government transport. I turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life, a deep, comforting rumble that resonated through the floorboards. I shifted the transmission into drive, signaling my intent to merge onto the empty highway. I did not check the rearview mirror. I did not cast a final glance at the decaying motel or the siblings who had tried to bury me in the snow. I pressed my foot against the accelerator and drove forward into the crisp Alaskan morning, steering my life toward a horizon that belonged entirely to me. The cycle of the Alaskan seasons is an exercise in unyielding endurance. The bitter frost eventually yields to the brief, blinding intensity of the summer sun, only to surrender once again to the creeping ice. 12 months have passed since the morning I turned my back on the flashing lights of the federal convoy. Today, I sit in a spacious, glass-walled executive office situated on the top floor of a downtown Anchorage high-rise. Beyond the reinforced window panes, the steel-gray waters of the Cook Inlet stretch toward the horizon, dotted with drifting ice floes. The distant snow-capped peak of Denali pierces the cloud cover, standing as a silent testament to the rugged, untamed frontier. Inside my office, the climate is perfectly regulated, secure, and profoundly quiet. The Borealis Resource Trust is no longer a hidden shadow entity used to silently absorb the financial wreckage of my siblings. I spent the last year dragging the corporate structure into the brilliant light of ethical modern commerce. We transitioned from a secretive holding company into a thriving, transparent powerhouse, specializing in sustainable maritime yields and responsible eco-management. I fired every legacy contractor who operated in the ethical gray areas my brother used to exploit. I implemented rigorous compliance standards, ensuring our commercial crabbing quotas are harvested with strict adherence to environmental preservation laws. The ledgers are clean, the revenue streams are legitimate, and the company reputation is pristine. The venture capitalists and local politicians who fled the disastrous investor banquet did not stay away for long. The Anchorage business community respects competence above all else. Once the federal indictments cleared the rot from the Johnson family name, those same elites returned to the negotiating table. They recognized that the new chief executive officer operated with lethal precision and undeniable integrity. We are currently finalizing a joint venture to develop a marine biology research facility on the exact lakeside property Cameron once tried to bulldoze. The undercover forensic auditor Wyatt and his firm now handle all external compliance reviews for my enterprise. The individuals I once viewed as hostile threats are now my most trusted corporate partners bound by verified data rather than pioneer fantasies. Justice moved through the federal court system with swift mechanical efficiency. Faced with the irrefutable evidence captured on the mirrored terminal server, Cameron did not stand a chance in front of a jury. His defense attorney advised him to accept a comprehensive plea deal to avoid a protracted trial that would have exposed even deeper layers of shadow loans and wire fraud. My brother is currently serving a 72-month sentence at a medium-security correctional institution in Oregon, far removed from the frozen tundra he pretended to conquer. There are no bespoke fleece vests or luxury architects behind those chain-link fences. Cameron wears a standard-issue uniform, living a rigid, scheduled existence governed by strict federal routines he cannot charm his way out of. He is stripped of his audience and his influence. The golden boy of the Anchorage elite is reduced to a federal inmate number. I do not receive letters from him, and I do not inquire about his status. The ledger is permanently closed. Brittany remained in Alaska, but her reality is restricted to the invisible margins of the city. Without her curated influencer brand, her luxury penthouse, or my perpetual financial safety net, she was forced to face the uncompromising local economy with zero marketable skills. A former colleague mentioned spotting her working the cash register at a mid-tier retail outlet near the Diamond Center Mall. She spends her days folding clearance sweaters and scanning barcodes for hourly wages, standing on her feet under harsh fluorescent lights. The glamorous, heavily filtered digital aesthetic she spent years constructing is replaced by a stiff polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. She resides in a cramped studio apartment, relying on public transportation to navigate the freezing winters. She is entirely cut off from my sphere of influence, existing in a parallel universe I no longer visit. The social exile she feared above all else became her permanent residence. On the corner of my expansive oak desk sits a custom acrylic display case. Inside the protective enclosure rests the heavy, cracked leather Bible my father handed me at the will reading. It remains exactly as it was the day I received it, its pages yellowed and its spine frayed. It serves not as a religious artifact, but as a tangible daily reminder of the ultimate test. My father was a calculating architect who understood the exact nature of his children. He knew my brother and sister were parasites driven by vanity and unearned entitlement. He also recognized that my compliance was a conditioned choice. For years, I allowed them to siphon my energy, believing my usefulness would eventually translate into familial affection. My father handed me the mechanism for my own liberation, wrapping it in a package he knew my siblings would discard as worthless. He gave them the rope to hang themselves, and he handed me the shears to cut the cord. Looking at the faded gold lettering on the ancient book, a profound realization anchors my daily routine. The true inheritance was never the grandfathered subsurface mineral deeds, the lucrative commercial fishing quotas, or the corporate holding accounts. Those assets were simply tools, the leverage required to execute a terminal extraction. The actual gift was the undeniable forced realization that my loyalty held zero value to people incapable of genuine love. For 30 years, I navigated my existence seeking validation from a toxic ecosystem. I tied my self-worth to my ability to fix their mistakes, acting as the silent infrastructure that kept their illusions afloat. The rigorous forensic audit cured me of that delusion. Drawing unyielding boundaries and severing the emotional conditioning did not leave me isolated. It created the necessary empty space required to build a life based on integrity, merit, and profound self-respect. The coastal wind howls against the reinforced glass of my office, a steady reminder of the unforgiving wilderness outside. I boot up my workstation preparing to review the quarterly yield projections for the upcoming maritime season. My hands do not tremble. My pulse is steady. The numbers scrolling across my monitor are clean and verified. There are no hidden deficits, no shadow loans, and no parasitic entities draining the accounts. I am the sole architect of my frontier, operating unburdened by the ghosts of a family that only loved what they could take. If you are listening to this and you recognize your own reflection in my story, hear this clearly. Society often conditions us to believe that shared DNA requires endless sacrifice, demanding we absorb the financial and emotional collateral damage of our relatives. We are told to keep the peace to smooth over the unpaid debts and to accept the disrespect in the name of family loyalty. But sharing a bloodline does not grant anyone a license to exploit your diligence or drain your resources. Walking away from a one-sided ledger is not an act of betrayal. It is a necessary act of survival. True independence materializes the exact moment you stop seeking approval from individuals who view your generosity as a weakness. You do not need a hidden trust fund or a secret mineral deed to reclaim your narrative. You simply need the courage to document the reality of your situation, draw an immovable boundary, and enforce the consequences without hesitation. Thank you for spending your time with me and allowing me to share the final audit of the Johnson family empire. If this journey of unmasking illusions and executing a terminal checkmate resonated with you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Zara Told Stories. Drop a comment below, telling me about a time you had to draw a hard line with someone who underestimated your worth. Keep your ledgers balanced, keep your receipts secure, and never apologize for protecting your own peace. I will see you in the next story. The frost of the Alaskan wilderness provides a fitting backdrop for the story of the Johnson family, a chilling narrative that lingers in the mind long after the final spreadsheet is closed and the federal agents drive away. On the surface, Ashley's meticulous dismantling of her siblings' fraudulent empire is a deeply satisfying tale of corporate retribution. It is the ultimate cathartic fantasy for anyone who has ever been overlooked, exploited, or underestimated by their own blood. Yet when the adrenaline of the hostile takeover fades, what remains in the quiet aftermath is not a triumph, but a profound American tragedy. It is a story that forces us to look past the dramatic boardroom confrontations and peer into the quiet, everyday failures of the traditional family structure. At its core, the destruction of the Johnson legacy was not caused by a hidden trust fund or a forged power of attorney. It was caused by a catastrophic collapse of parenting values. In American culture, we are often seduced by the glittering outward metrics of success. We celebrate the rugged pioneer, the ambitious entrepreneur, and the curated picture-perfect lifestyle. In the relentless pursuit of providing a better life, traditional family structures sometimes conflate financial provision with genuine long-term emotional guidance. Michael Johnson, the patriarch of this fractured dynasty, fell into this precise fatal trap. He built an impressive empire of commercial fisheries and oil leases, but he utterly failed to build character within his own home. Cameron and Brittany were raised in an ecosystem that prized outward ambition over internal integrity. They were taught that their value was tethered to their image, their status, and their ability to consume the world around them. When parents abdicate the responsibility of instilling emotional awareness when they fail to teach their children that empathy and honesty are far more valuable than a luxury eco-lodge or a viral social media post, they do not just raise entitled adults. They raise hollow predators. By constantly shielding his favored children from the natural consequences of their vanity, Michael did not protect them. He disarmed them for the real world. He allowed a moral rot to take root in his family, substituting financial leverage for the difficult daily work of moral guidance. But the failure extends far beyond the spoiling of the golden children. It is perhaps most devastating in its treatment of the competent one. Ashley's existence within the Johnson household highlights a toxic dynamic that plagues many traditional families: the weaponization of duty. True fairness in raising children does not mean dividing a liquid estate equally in a will. It means treating them with equal respect, emotional support, and accountability while you are alive. For decades, Ashley was forced to act as the silent infrastructure of her family, absorbing the collateral damage of her siblings' recklessness. She was the shock absorber, the accountant, the adult in a room full of children. We are often culturally conditioned to view this kind of silent suffering as a noble familial responsibility. We are taught to keep the peace and carry the burdens of our bloodline without complaint. Yet this expectation is a profound failure of parental fairness. A child should never be expected to parent their own siblings, nor should their competence be treated as a limitless line of credit for the incompetent. By exploiting Ashley's diligence to maintain the illusion of family harmony, her father denied her the very emotional safety and validation a parent is supposed to provide. He relied on her brilliance, but he did not protect her heart. This brings us to the most unsettling revelation of the story, a viewpoint that cuts directly against conventional thinking. When we reach the climax of the narrative, it is easy to view Michael Johnson as a posthumous mastermind. He left his toxic children a tax-burdened cash inheritance, a poisoned chalice, and secretly deeded his true empire to the only daughter who deserved it, hidden inside a family Bible. It feels like a masterstroke of poetic justice. But if we look closer, we must realize that the secret of page 47 was not a stroke of genius. It was a devastating, cowardly confession. Michael's elaborate legal trap was a desperate apology for a lifetime of enabling monsters. Rather than doing the grueling, uncomfortable work of disciplining Cameron and Brittany while he was alive, rather than looking them in the eye and saying no, he built a financial guillotine to do it from beyond the grave. He used the ultimate symbol of spiritual and moral guidance, a Bible, to conceal a weapon of absolute financial destruction. Long-term guidance for children should not require a hidden trust, a mirrored computer server, and a team of federal agents to enforce basic human decency. The father's final act was an admission that his parenting was so fundamentally flawed, he had to rely on a ruthless estate attorney to teach his children the lessons he was too terrified to teach them at the dinner table. We tell these stories not just for the thrill of the plot twist, but to unmask the illusions we live with every day. If you find yourself reflecting on the unwritten ledgers in your own life, the boundaries you have been afraid to draw, or the toxic dynamics you have mistaken for love, I invite you to join our community. Please take a moment to subscribe and follow Zara Told Stories. Together, we explore the hidden truths of human relationships, shining a light on the stories that challenge our perspectives and validate our quietest struggles. Your support helps us continue to bring these necessary narratives to the forefront. As we navigate the complexities of raising the next generation, we must ask ourselves what kind of legacy we are truly leaving behind. Are we cultivating genuine character, or are we simply funding glittering illusions? Society conditions us to believe that family is a sacred, unbreakable covenant. We are taught that blood is thicker than water, that forgiveness is the highest moral virtue, and that cutting ties with our own relatives is a profound failure of the human spirit. But the freezing Alaskan wind carries a different, harsher truth, a calculus that demands we reevaluate everything we thought we knew about love and obligation. Perhaps the conventional wisdom we have swallowed for generations is a comforting lie. Perhaps the most profound act of love a parent can offer is not unconditional support, but the guarantee of absolute, uncompromising consequence. And for those who have spent a lifetime balancing the emotional checkbooks of others, bleeding themselves dry to sustain an illusion, the ultimate philosophical truth is this: blood does not demand perpetual loyalty. It merely provides a shared starting line. Forgiveness is not a virtue when it finances your own destruction. As you look at the faces across your own dinner table tonight, measuring the unspoken debts and the quiet resentments, ask yourself, are you sitting with family, or are you simply sitting with the architects of your next audit? The answer might just change the rest of your life.